The Rise of the Spanish Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1, People Who Shouldn't Be Alive. Carlo, where are you? A shout from the top of the luxurious palace interrupted Carlo's thoughts and pulled his soul back to the real world. I'm here, father. Carlo responded quickly. Thank God, my child. Are you feeling better? Just a few minutes later, the voice came from far away, and the owner of the voice was already behind Carlo. Carlo turned slightly, still a little incredulous. Biological father, the current ruler of the famous Savoy dynasty and the first king of unified Italy, Vittorio Emanuele II. I'm feeling better now. The medicine the doctor gave me is very effective. Carlo nodded honestly, but in his heart he was thinking about how to talk to this unfamiliar father. Ettore is gone. You still have us, don't you? Ettore was the third son of Vittorio Emanuele II and was given the title of Duke of Monferrato at birth. In Carlo's memory, this brother was very good to Carlo, and their relationship was much better than that with his two older brothers. But unfortunately, when Carlo's soul came to this world, Duke Ettore of Monferrato was terminally ill and died soon after. Due to the extremely poor medical level of that era, the cause of Ettore's death was not found out. Being a prince, but dying in such an unclear manner made Carlo somewhat afraid of this real world. For an ordinary person who has experienced advanced technology in society, it is really a torture to experience the technology and life of 160 years ago. Even though Carlo was the favorite son of Vittorio Emanuele II and the prince of the newly established Kingdom of Italy, it could not offset this bad feeling. Seeing that Carlo was still silent, Vittorio Emanuele II touched Carlo's head again, forced a smile, and said, "It will be okay. Everything will be fine, child. I will not allow anything to take you away from me, not even God. Adelheid and I will protect you, and you will be fine, I promise you." For Vittorio Emanuele II, known for his piety to God, such a promise was obviously heartfelt and sincere. Carlo naturally knew the reputation of Vittorio Emanuele II. Carlo had no rejection of this cheap father who cared about him very much. "I'm much better, father. Thank you for your concern. I'm fine now," Carlo said. "That's good, child. May God bless you, and I will accompany you." Vittorio Emanuele II touched Carlo's head again, and then signaled the maid beside him to help Carlo back to the room young, which means he had many children but little blessings. Except for Prince Oddone, who died young at the age of nearly 20. The remaining 3 children who died young all died unexpectedly in infancy. Although Vittorio Emanuele II lost one less son because of Carlo's arrival, the successive losses of sons in his middle age also made Vittorio Emanuele II cherish his family affection. Carlo, the youngest son, was the most favored by Vittorio Emanuele II. He was born as the noble Duke of Chablace. His property included a large amount of land, several castles and manors, and hundreds of servants who were always ready to serve Carlo. While Vittorio Emanuele II was wondering what to think, Carlo had been helped into the room by 2 maids. Looking at the 2 maids, one pure and beautiful on the left and the other with attractive figures on the right, Carlo swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Although monogamy is prevalent in the West, mistress is not a strange word for nobles. Especially for the top echelons of the nobility. As long as Carlo was willing, girls who wanted to become Carlo's mistress could line up from the Italian capital Florence to the northwestern city of Turin. At least on this point, Carlo was willing to admit that the world 160 years ago was still somewhat interesting. Of course, mistresses were just a tacit enjoyment among the nobles, and were generally not made public. For top nobles, maids are certainly a safer choice than mistresses, and they are also trustworthy in terms of loyalty. Especially for some young nobles, maids are more suitable for Enlightenment education, and are also the first choice for most European nobles to educate their children. The 2 maids who served Carlo were the enlighteners chosen by Vittorio Emanuele II for Carlo. They combined the characteristics of purity and sexiness, and they were both very beautiful. At first, Carlo enjoyed the massage from both of them, but the pleasure in the middle and lower parts instantly brought Carlo back to his senses. Turning his head, he saw that Anna, who looked pure and lovely, had already put her hand into Carlo's pants and was quietly teasing him. "Okay, Anna." Carlo patted Anna's head, looked at Anna's little eyes blinking as she raised her head, and finally smiled. "Not there yet." "Okay." Hearing this, Anna nodded with a little disappointment, and her hand left a certain place. "I want to be alone for a while." After enjoying the skilled massage from the two maids, Carlo finally relaxed a little and instructed the two women. Soon, the two maids left the room, leaving Carlo alone in the room, lost in thought. Carlo reluctantly accepted the fact that he had traveled to this era. At least as a noble, he still had many ways to enjoy himself, which was much better than the hard life in the future. But the problem is that, although monarchy is still the mainstream in the world today, it can only last for a few decades. After the outbreak of World War I and World War II, it dealt a heavy blow to monarchies around the world and made monarchical countries almost disappear from people's sight. In later generations, apart from the United Kingdom, a monarchy where the monarch's power is almost in name only, people have very little understanding of monarchies and can't even think of a few monarchies that still exist. Carlo's Kingdom of Italy did not achieve a republic until after World War II, but during Mussolini's reign, the power and status of the Italian royal family were already in jeopardy, and its abolition was just a matter of a word from Mussolini. Although he didn't know how he traveled through time, now that he had started a new life with such a high starting point, Carlo naturally had greater ambitions. In order to take control of his future destiny, Carlo made a new plan. A new book is launched. Please recommend, collect, and invest. Chapter 2 Father's love is like a mountain of wealth. If you want to take your destiny into your own hands, you can only keep climbing up, become the one in power in the country, and become the object of trust and obedience of the people. In a country like Italy, there is only one way, and that is to become the king of Italy. But it is obvious that for Carlo, who has two older brothers, it is almost impossible to become the king of Italy. But this does not mean that there is no chance at all, because according to the trend of history, a revolution is about to break out in Spain, and the Savoy dynasty of Italy is about to obtain the Spanish crown. Although the crown was only worn by the Savoy dynasty for 3 years, it was Carlo's closest chance to the crown. As long as he could compete with his brother Prince Emanuele, Carlo would have the hope of winning the Spanish crown and becoming the king of the Kingdom of Spain. But this is just a plan after all, and it is difficult to realize it. But no matter what, in order to plan and prepare in advance, it is still necessary to reserve a certain amount of talent and wealth. After all, to put it bluntly, without startup capital, all plans are just empty talk. In terms of property, the land and castle under Carlo's name were worth at least 2 or 3 million lire. £1 was about 25 lire, which was about 7.33 grams of gold, which was quite valuable in this era, when currency had not depreciated. But unfortunately, most of the land and castles cannot be sold, because they come from the royal family. The only property that Carlo could truly control was the annual pension he received as a member of the royal family, which averaged about 260,000 lire per year. However, because Carlo was still a minor, the funds had been kept by his father, Vittorio Emanuele II, and it was estimated that at least close to 3 million lire was saved. Carlo's goal was the 2.6 million lire annual pension. If he could obtain the right to freely dispose of his own property, this amount of money would be enough for Carlo to accomplish many things. The good news is that given how much his father, Vittorio Emanuele II, cares for him, it should be easy for Carlo to gain control of his own property. After all, Carlo's mother, Archduchessa Delhide, had died more than 10 years ago, so there was no obstacle for Carlo to obtain the right to dispose of his own property. Although Carlo was not yet an adult, this also allowed Carlo to obtain a relatively reliable subordinate from Vittorio Emanuele II. After all, Carlo's property ultimately belongs to Carlo personally. Vittorio Emanuele II may be able to keep it for Carlo until he comes of age, but it is impossible for him to keep it for his entire life. Now if Carlo wants to properly handle and manage his property, he must have more capable assistants, such as a court butler. In the European courts, the royal butler is very important. The butler is not only the most capable and loyal assistant of a noble, but also lives and dies with the entire noble family. Moreover, in most cases, positions such as butlers tend to become alternative hereditary systems. For example, Bellasbon, the butler of Vittorio Emanuele II, his father was the butler of King Carlo Emanuele III of Sardinia, and his son is likely to become the butler of Crown Prince Umberto. The Italian royal family trusts him very much, and he is a truly trustworthy subordinate. If there is a loyal and capable butler to help Carlo manage his property, I believe Vittorio Emanuele II will be assured that Carlo has the right to dispose of his property. Where does this loyal and capable butler come from? Of course, Vittorio Emanuele II chose it from his trusted subordinates. A few days later, in the Italian king's office, Vittorio Emanuele II looked at his son Carlo with surprise and asked curiously, "Little Carlo, may I know the purpose of your exercise of the right to dispose of your property?" It's not that Vittorio Emanuele II was reluctant to part with the 2 million lire, but it was a huge fortune after all, and Vittorio Emanuele II didn't want to see his children fall because of money. "Invest in some businesses," Carlo answered in detail, speaking the truth. "This way, when brother Umberto and brother Amadia get married, I will have money to give them gifts." After hearing Carlo's answer, Vittorio Emanuele II touched Carlo's head lovingly and said with a look of confusion, "Your money is enough to give them gifts, Carlo. More than 2 million lire can build a warship. You can't just think of giving them a fleet, kid." Carlo shook his head and seemed quite serious. "That is not my money, father. I want to give them gifts with real money so that I can feel happy." "Okay, son, you convinced me." Vittorio Emanuele II smiled and nodded and said helplessly, "What reason do I have to refuse? This should be the best reason in the world. However, Carlo, I still have to remind you. Before you come of age, you need a capable and loyal steward to help you manage your property. Of course, you have the final say on how to spend the money, but you at least need someone to figure out what the 2 million lire worth is, right?" Vittorio Emanuele II reminded. "The value of the Italian lira and the French franc is not much different. More than 2 million francs is definitely not a small sum in that era. Even if converted into the most valuable precious metal gold, it would weigh more than 700 kilograms, nearly 1 ton. This is also why Vittorio Emanuele II mentioned that Carlo must have a loyal and capable steward to help manage the property, because the money was so huge." Carlo was of course happy about this. After all, the Italian royal family had a relatively sufficient talent pool. Although the Kingdom of Italy was established not long ago, its predecessor was the Kingdom of Sardinia. Kingdom of Sardinia had little presence in the whole of Europe. There were still many talented people who were loyal to the royal family and had certain abilities. Vittorio Emanuele II was relieved to see that Carlo was not opposed to sending a loyal person to help him manage his property. In order to show his fatherly love, Vittorio Emanuele II then said, "To show my support for you, Carlo, I will give you around sum of 3 million lire. You can come to me anytime to collect it. A new book is launched. Please recommend, collect, read and invest." Chapter 3 Laurent Royal. Vittorio Emanuele II still acted quickly. On the day that Carlo received his annual pension of 3 million lire, Vittorio Emanuele II also brought Carlo his carefully selected butler. However, the decision-making power still lies with Carlo. After all, the butler is the most trusted subordinate of a noble, and Carlo has 100% of the choice. Carlo and Vittorio Emanuele II held a meeting in a conference room of the royal palace. Because Carlo was not very old, the talents recommended by Vittorio Emanuele II were also not very old, and looked to be in their early 20s. However, according to the information provided by Vittorio Emanuele II, this guy named Laurent is not simple. First of all, in terms of academic qualifications, not only did he graduate from a prestigious university, he also studied in England and France for several years. However, because he has been trained and funded by the royal family since childhood, his loyalty is also guaranteed worthing. Moreover, Lorenzo himself manages part of the property for the Italian royal family, and his abilities in finance and economics are worthy of recognition. Simply put, Laurent is a talent who has been tested in terms of knowledge and ability, and his loyalty is also worthy of recognition. Carlo also had a good first impression of Laurent. Born in a monarchy country, Laurent has a good impression of the monarchy. especially since everything he has comes from the funding of the Italian royal family. His loyalty to the entire Italian royal family is beyond doubt. Lauren? Carlo spoke first. Yes, Your Highness. I'm Lauren, and it is an honor to serve you. Lauren nodded very respectfully, keeping his attitude very low. Very good. Carlo nodded with satisfaction, and he was quite appreciative of Lauren's behavior. After all, if his own butler did not recognize the superior status of the nobility, who else would recognize the nobility? Were you working for my father before? Carlo asked. I used to manage plantations in the Philippines, and also acquired several newspapers in Turin. Carlo is quite satisfied. Although the plantations managed by Lauren are all crop plantations, this management experience can also be applied to future rubber plantations. It goes without saying how profitable rubber plantations are. With such experience, Carlo can easily become a giant in the rubber industry when planning for the future. Important. If a person or a country can control the power of public opinion, they can easily reverse right and wrong, and say what is right is wrong, and what is wrong is right. This is very important for stabilizing the monarchy in Italy or Spain. At least it can influence the people's choice, and prevent the monarchy from withdrawing from the stage of Italy and Spain so early. Whether now or in the future, people have a blind herd mentality. No matter whether a system is good or bad, as long as there are many people who say it is bad, it is bad. If the power of public opinion is mastered well, it will become Carlo's most important weapon in the future, second only to the army, and it will also play an unexpected role in Carlo's future plans. Whether he becomes the king of Spain or continues to be an Italian nobleman, he wants to use his noble status to do some good things for the people. The power of public opinion, mainly newspapers, is Carlo's important weapon for propaganda. After all, the purpose of doing good is to let the people know that not all nobles are cruel rulers who oppress the people, and the monarchy is not all bad. Tell me what you think of the newspaper. Although Carlo was very satisfied, his investigation of Lauren was not completely over. If Lauren can have some compatibility with Carlo in future development, perhaps the cooperation between the two will be more perfect. The future. The role of newspapers is quite important, and can even influence the people who read newspapers. Although the role of a single newspaper is not significant, if we can control dozens or even hundreds of newspapers, and then publish a piece of news in these hundreds of newspapers, then this news will instantly be believed by hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, regardless of whether the news is true or false. I think that considering the potential and role of newspapers, it is necessary for you to purchase several newspapers as your own weapons of public opinion, so as to exert influence on the people. Carlo agreed, agreeing with what Lauren said. Although the development of newspapers has not yet formed a large-scale public opinion force, the role of newspapers as public opinion institutions is unquestionable. The fact that Lauren was able to see this first proves that he has a very good vision for strategic development. With such a talent as the manager of Carlo's property, at least the probability of Carlo's property increasing is much greater than the probability of decreasing. You have successfully impressed me, Lauren. At the end of the conversation, Carlo smiled and nodded, and said to Lauren, who looked nervous, "From now on, you are my palace steward." The butler in the Western Court is not like the eunuch in the Eastern Court. Not only does the butler have a very high say, but he will not be discriminated against by anyone. Lauren was not opposed to becoming Carlo's butler. After all, if he was under Vittorio Emanuele II, he would be just a talented person with decent abilities. But if he is loyal to Carlo, Lauren will become Carlo's confidant and important subordinate, and the importance of the two sides will be completely disproportionate. Moreover, Carlo is the Duke of Chablais in Italy, and it is not shameful to be the Duke's butler. Your Highness, because I was an orphan, since I was a child, I only have my first name, Laurent, and I don't have my own last name. Could you please give me a unique surname? Lauren is willing to spend his whole life serving His Royal Highness the Duke. At the end of the conversation, Lauren suddenly spoke up and asked Carlo to give him a surname. This kind of thing is not uncommon. If a commoner suddenly gains the trust and importance of the monarch, it is not surprising that he is granted a surname that is integrated into the aristocratic class. When Lauren asked for a surname, he was actually expressing his loyalty to Carlo. Among the entire European nobility would be ruined, and his future would naturally be ruined. Carlo naturally understood this. He looked at Lauren, who looked determined, and smiled. He said, "Well, Butler Lauren, I think the last name Royd is good. Lauren Royd will definitely become a legend worth writing about in Italian history." Lauren nodded and accepted the last name respectfully. Loyal means loyalty in English. The meaning of the name Carlo gave him is self-evident, and Lauren also hopes to express his loyalty in this way, so as to gain Carlo's trust and reuse, and show his ability. A new book is launched. Please recommend, collect, read and invest. Chapter 4 Italian Sun. Carlo assigned to Lauren was to own a regular newspaper. Whether buying an existing newspaper or starting one from scratch, Carlo wanted only one result. In order to show Carlo his abilities, Lauren took this mission very seriously. In just 2 days, he investigated the existing newspaper organizations in Italy and selected those with potential and that might be acquired. Il Sole 24 or 24 Hour Sun was the list of newspapers that Lauren finally came up with. This is a newspaper founded last year and currently has only a certain degree of popularity in Milan's business community. But this newspaper has persisted to later generations and even became one of the top 10 newspaper media in Italy. To be able to achieve such results shows that the potential of this newspaper is beyond doubt. This also means that Lauren, who chose this newspaper, has an absolutely unique and excellent vision. After determining the acquisition target, the next task Carlo gave to Lauren was to properly acquire the newspaper called The Sun. This also reflects the advantage of having someone to command you. At least Carlo doesn't have to do some things personally despite his status as a prince. The acquisition process was relatively smooth. At that time, The Sun was ultimately just a tabloid, and its founder could not resist Carlo's temptation to buy it at a higher price. It took Carlo less than 4 days from proposing to acquire the newspaper to obtain all the shares of The Sun. Unfortunately, because The Sun is still a tabloid, the number of newspapers sold every day is only about 1,500, and the sales volume is barely enough to support the newspaper itself. However, Carlo's goal was not to make the newspaper profitable immediately. The purpose of a newspaper was not just to make a little money. Carlo's goal was to fill the streets of Italy with cheaper and more popular newspapers, to increase Carlo's control over Italian public opinion. Whether he to stay in Italy or seeks the opportunity to become the king of Spain in the future, Carlo's experience in newspapers will enable him to build his empire of public opinion more smoothly. After controlling public opinion, it will be easier to do what you want. At least when the public supports it, Carlo will take the initiative. But then again, compared to other small and medium-sized private newspapers, The Sun controlled by Carlo still has many advantages. At least with his status as an Italian prince, Carlo can publish some content that is not easy to pass review, such as current political news that the public is more concerned about. This is not the era of later times, when newspapers had no sales at all. If there is good news and content, it is still easy for newspapers to expand sales and achieve profitability. As Carlo's only subordinate at present, Lauren naturally took charge of the Italian Sun and was fully responsible for its expansion. Carlo made several plans for Lauren. First, The Sun's daily circulation should be increased from 1,500 to at least 7,500 over the next 2 years. Considering that The Sun is based in Milan, a prosperous city in northern Italy, and can also radiate to Turin and Genoa, which are relatively close, such sales requirements are actually not high. The second requirement is that The Sun must become one of the well-known newspaper media in northern Italy and have a certain degree of credibility among the people. If the content published in newspapers cannot convince the public, then there is no need for the newspaper to exist. After all, the primary purpose of manipulating public opinion is to make the public believe in public opinion, which is also one of Carlo's expectations for Lauren. Another thing is to make The Sun profitable within 2 years and control as many newspapers as possible. Although Carlo's original intention was not to make money through the newspaper, since the newspaper industry is able to be self-sufficient, Carlo would definitely use the funds in more important areas. As for establishing or acquiring more newspapers, it is naturally to strengthen the power of public opinion in Carlo's hands. In Carlo's plan, the Sun will focus on reporting on current affairs and international events in the future, and some tabloids will be able to fill the gaps in entertainment news and various gossips. After all, if a credible newspaper were to report tidbits and gossip, it would definitely undermine the credibility of the newspaper. While Lauren was diligently carrying out Carlo's task, Carlo, on his side, was already looking at the existing map of the Kingdom of Italy in deep thought. Although the fragmented Apennine Peninsula has been basically unified into a complete Kingdom of Italy, there are still two places that have not returned to the embrace of Italy. The Venetian region in the north was still controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Rome, the most important city for Italy, still belongs to the Papal States, the capitulator that was ridiculed in World War II, but the French Empire bathed in the afterglow of Napoleon. Because Germany had not yet been unified, France at that time could be said to be the overlord of Western Europe and the strongest land force in Europe. With the support of France, the Papal States were able to continue to control Rome, which meant that the capital of Italy could only be Florence. But Carlo is not in a hurry. Historically, the process of the Kingdom of Sardinia unifying Italy can be said to be an easy victory, without going through any difficult battles at all. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the largest country in southern Italy, was corrupt and was easily destroyed by a 1,000-man regiment led by Garibaldi. The size of the states in central Italy was completely disproportionate to that of the Kingdom of Sardinia, and they had no right to resist the trend of unification. The two really tough bones to chew were completely dependent on Prussia. In the Austro-Prussian War, Prussia attracted the attention of the Austrian Empire and recovered the Venetian region. During the Franco-Prussian War, the French took over Rome smoothly thanks to their defense against the Prussian army. Two bones that seemed very tough to chew were broken so easily. Although it was the Prussian army that broke the two bones, it was indeed the Kingdom of Italy that gained the benefits. Carlo had some understanding of the period of Prussia's rise out. If we follow the historical trend, the Austro-Prussian War should break out in half a year. Prussia will accelerate the unification of Germany, and Italy will recover the Venetian region in the north. Faced with such an important historical node, Carlo naturally could not let the opportunity slip away. Although it was impossible to directly interfere in the Austro-Prussian War, as the Kingdom of Italy was a participant in the war, Carlo could still change the course of history a little bit. A new book is launched. Please recommend, collect, read and invest. Chapter 5 Character is the most important. Now that you have the newspaper as a weapon of public opinion, the next most important step is to create a popular persona for yourself. If a character is well created, the public can assume that Carlo is on the majority side without him taking any action. As a member of the royal family, his friendly and people-loving character is bound to be popular. The people certainly do not want the royal family above them to act superior, which is why later monarchs, headed by the British king, always appear friendly and loving. Whether presented to the Italian people or the European people, rigid and conservative ideas are bound to be unpopular. Although there are a large number of conservatives in monarchical countries, for Italy and Spain where Carlo wanted to go, the reformers are what the people really want to see. However, although Carlo wanted to establish the impression of a reformist, he would never make any comments on Italy's reforms. Reform is reform, but who will lead this reform is a real important issue. Supporting and looking forward to reform is a weapon in Carlo's hand, but if he really interferes with the reform, it will be more harm than good. No government would like a king who dictates everything in the country. If Carlo wants to become the king of Spain, he must first understand how to be a mascot and not dictate everything. On February 21, 1866, the Italian newspaper Sol 24 published an article written by Carlo titled "We Want Bread, Macaroni, and Milk," which successfully fired the first shot in establishing the impression of caring for the people. In this completely inspirational article, Carlo repeatedly mentioned the importance of the Italian grassroots people, especially the farmers in southern Italy. The article also concluded, whether in Italy or Europe, people's demands are actually not complicated. They just want to have enough food and clothing. If the government could pay more attention to the grassroots people, perhaps people's lives would be happier. The whole article does not have any profound truth, and even portrays Carlo as a prince who has nothing to do and is overflowing with love. Although many grassroots people developed a favorable impression of Carlo because of this report, government officials were dismissive of it. Taking care of the lives of the lower classes? That sounds nice, but isn't it still funded by the government? Putting aside the question of how much fiscal budget is needed to improve the lives of all the lower class people in Italy, wouldn't it be better to invest this money in areas where Italy needs it more, such as military construction and industrial development? As for the common people at the bottom of society, it is already good enough to ensure that they do not starve to death. Who of the nobles has the mind to care whether the common people have enough to eat or whether they are warmly clothed? Because Carlo had no one available, this report only had a certain influence around Milan and did not even spread to Florence. But for Carlo's plan, the first step has been successfully taken. Regardless of the government and the nobles' ideas, the first thing to do now is to make the people believe that Carlo is a prince who cares about the lower classes and even has an overflowing love. Such a character will definitely not be hated by the people. After all, the vast majority of groups in a country are lower class people, which is something that cannot be changed by any political system or ideology. Unfortunately, Carlo is too young now, and many of his plans cannot be carried out smoothly. He still needs to spend a lot of time and energy to complete Italy's traditional aristocratic elite education. Although he was only a prince, he was ranked third in the line of succession to the throne, which was basically impossible. However, Vittorio Emanuele II was still very concerned about Carlo's education and training. As the youngest son of Vittorio Emanuele II, Carlo undoubtedly received the most love and attention from his father. This year, Carlo is 15 years old and has basically completed the early stage of elite aristocratic education. According to Vittorio Emanuele II's plan for Carlo's training, Carlo had two choices. One was to choose to study management and economics in depth, so that he could properly almost handle his land and property in the future. The other choice was to go to the military academy and become a glorious Italian officer to serve the royal family and the country. For Carlo, who already had a plan in mind, the most suitable choice was of course to go to a military academy and develop his military capabilities. More importantly, in the military academy, you may be able to meet some officers who are not famous, but have good military abilities and build your own network. It's a pity that Carlo is not the first heir to the throne, that is, the crown prince. Otherwise, he could have formed a palace guard with the status of crown prince and cultivated his own armed forces from scratch. Although unified Italy was qualified to compete with the great powers, its foundation was still too weak at that time, even in military academies. Italy is not one of the top 10 famous military academies in the world in later generations. Even now, there are not many military academies worth choosing in Italy. Currently the most reliable military academy choice is the Turin Military Academy, located in the former capital of the Kingdom of Sardinia, institution for training military backbones for the Kingdom of Sardinia. King Vittorio Emanuele II supported Carlo's desire to go to the military academy, Royal Military Academy of Turin. After all, first of all, Carlo did not need to charge into battle personally. Secondly, cavalry would be eliminated in the next few decades, and the terrain of Spain and Italy was not suitable for large-scale cavalry charges. In fact, compared to those instructors of the Royal Military Academy of Turin, Carlo admired a legendary Italian named more, one of the three great contributors to the unification of Italy, a hero of two worlds, Giuseppe Garibaldi. If we simply discuss military capabilities, Garibaldi is definitely the best military commander in the whole of Italy in modern times. Even later historians only mentioned three outstanding contributors to the Italian unification event, the so-called three heroes of the Italian nation building. The unification of Italy is attributed to Mazzini's ideas, Garibaldi's sword, and Cavour's diplomacy. The description in this passage is enough to show how excellent Garibaldi's military talent is. But unfortunately, among the three great men who founded Italy, only Prime Minister Cavour was from the faction of the Kingdom of Sardinia. Mazzini, who created the idea of Italian unification, was a thorough republican and an enemy of the monarchy. Although Garibaldi, whom Carlo admired extremely, did not explicitly oppose the monarchy, he had repeatedly defected to the republican system, and was not trusted by the monarchy, resolutely handed it over to the rule of the Kingdom of Sardinia. However, Garibaldi's high prestige in the army and his history of serving the Republic still prevented him from entering the upper echelons of the New Italy. Please vote for me monthly, please read my book, please add me to your collection, and please vote for me recommendation. Chapter 6, a surprise. Garibaldi's greatness is unquestionable. The famous French writer Victor Hugo once said, "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I must tell the truth. Among all the generals who have fought for France, only Garibaldi is invincible." After the Franco-Prussian War, Prussian General Wilder once admitted, if all the French troops were commanded by Garibaldi, then there would probably be more than one flag captured in the War of 1870. Such a general who made his enemies sigh and admire involuntarily did not enter the top level of the Italian government for various reasons, but lived in seclusion on the small island of Caprera. The good news is that, because of Garibaldi's high reputation among the Italian people and his contribution to the unification of Italy, Garibaldi was able to live leisurely in Italy without worrying about being arrested by the government. Of course, Carlo wanted to meet such a person who was admired by everyone. Impertinent visit would only cause trouble, and since Carlo was still young, there was no need to rush. However, this does not mean that Carlo cannot contact Garibaldi at this time. In fact, Garibaldi lived a colorful life in retirement and even published a novel, The Thousand, which tells the story of how he led an army of only 1,000 people to conquer the kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Garibaldi's reputation earned him a whopping 21,000 lire, or about £840, for the first printing of the book. Since Garibaldi had such an interest, Carlo certainly didn't mind inviting Garibaldi to serialize some stories in the Italian 24 or Sun. If it were about Garibaldi's combat deeds in the army, I believe most Italian people would prefer it. Carlo's Italian 24 or newspaper was able to expand rapidly thanks to Garibaldi's reputation, and Carlo also had the opportunity to get to know Garibaldi. But it all depends on whether Garibaldi is willing to publish his article in the Italian Sun. If Garibaldi is unwilling to publish his article in the Italian Sun, Carlo will have no way to stop him. Because in Italy, Garibaldi's reputation even surpassed that of the royal family, and the Italian people would not allow any slander against Garibaldi. In 1879, a reporter named Giovanni wrote 2 stories to attack Garibaldi personally, and the reporter was assassinated not long after. If Garibaldi had not personally launched a fundraising campaign and donated a pension to Giovanni's widow, Giovanni's family would probably have continued to live under the condemnation of the Italian people. This also indirectly proves Garibaldi's greatness. For Italy and the Italian people, Garibaldi has no shortcomings. In order to make a good first impression on Garibaldi, Carlo revised the letter he was going to send to Garibaldi several times and asked Laurent to check if there was anything inappropriate. A few days later, Garibaldi's peaceful life was broken on a small island called Caprera in the northeast of Sardinia. Garibaldi's second son, Giotti, looked at his frowning father and asked in surprise. It was the first time that Giotti saw his father frown since he retired to Caprera Island, and it was because of a letter. If she didn't believe in her father Garibaldi's character, Giotti would even think that her father's lover outside was pregnant and wanted the property. Nothing, Giotti. It's just a letter from the royal family. Garibaldi looked at the letter on the table and pondered, while subconsciously answering his son's question. A letter from the royal family? Giotti's surprise became even stronger, and he even said involuntarily, "A letter from the royal family to you? Has something happened again?" "It hasn't come to that point, Giotti." Garibaldi smiled and shook his head and said self-deprecatingly, "Even if something happened, they would never look for me unless Vittorio's crown is in danger again." "What is this?" Giotti's curiosity still did not dissipate, and his gaze shifted to the envelope on the table. "It's a letter from His Highness Carlo." Garibaldi still had a faint smile on his face and said, "By the way, I have seen that little guy before. Is he feeling better?" "It's him." Giotti nodded and said happily, "Among those guys in the royal family, I like His Highness Carlo. It's a pity that His Highness is not the crown prince of the kingdom. Some things can only be said in front of me. You'd better keep your mouth shut when you go out." Garibaldi glanced at his somewhat excited son and reminded him, "If you don't want to live in seclusion with me in Caprera for the rest of your life, you'd better respect those guys in the royal family." "I know, father." Is there anything that Prince Carlo wrote to you about? Giotti was still full of curiosity about Carlo's letter and kept asking. Garibaldi nodded and said with a smile, "This should be the first time that someone in the royal family has praised me to this extent. Carlo wants me to write an article for his Sun newspaper, preferably one that tells some of the stories of the red shirts." Giotti's cheerful words brought Garibaldi and Carlo closer, and Garibaldi changed the way he addressed Carlo from His Highness to Little Carlo. At this time, Carlo didn't know that the Garibaldi he was thinking about had actually come into contact with the owner of this body a long time ago, and Garibaldi had a very good impression of Carlo. But it's normal, if you think about it. Carlo, the original self, has been sick since childhood. His father is busy with government affairs, and his mother died early. Naturally, his personality has become timid and friendly. Having seen the arrogance and extravagance of the nobles, it was no surprise that Garibaldi had a good impression of Little Carlo. Is the Italian Sun newspaper published by His Highness Carlo? Giotti's excitement became more obvious, and he couldn't wait to say, "Dad, didn't you say before that you wanted to write your story for more Italians to read? Isn't this a good opportunity?" Garibaldi shook his head helplessly as he looked at his son, who was cheering and jumping for joy. He said, "Although I can write this story, it is not up to me to decide whether more Italians can read it. If my story were to reach His Highness Carlo's Italian son, it would be more trouble than it's worth. However, it is hard to refuse His Highness Carlo's invitation. Let me write a few less boring stories first, and see how those old guys in Florence react." Although it is said that the idea of Italian unification was created by Mazzini, no one can deny that Garibaldi's pure and deep love for Italy also influenced the vast majority of Italians. Although Garibaldi made outstanding contributions to the unification of Italy, he was too close to the Republic. A story adapted from real events may be popular among Italians, but not necessarily by the Italian government and royal family. Because of this, Garibaldi did not want to affect other people because of himself, especially Carlo, with whom he had a certain affection. A new book is launched, and I'm begging for all kinds of tickets, reading and investment. I'm begging you. Chapter 7 Prussian-Austrian Conflict. Garibaldi finally accepted Carlo's invitation and became a collaborator of the Italian 24-hour newspaper, publishing his own stories in the newspaper. Although Garibaldi was a little hesitant at first, all obstacles disappeared once Carlo obtained permission from his father Vittorio Emanuele II. The reason why Vittorio Emanuele II agreed to let Garibaldi publish his articles was very simple. After all, Carlo was the owner of the Sun, and Garibaldi's articles would still be reviewed, so it was impossible for any article to be published. As for whether Carlo would be deceived by Garibaldi and agree to Garibaldi's publication of articles advocating the Republic, Vittorio Emanuele II was not worried at all. Laurent was a talent he personally selected, and his loyalty to the royal family and support for the monarchy were trustworthy. Carlo was of course also very excited. At that time, the attitude of Italians towards Garibaldi was equivalent to the attitude of those crazy fans in later generations towards their favorite stars. The word fanatic was simply not enough to describe it. Once Garibaldi's article is published in Il Sole 24 it will immediately become one of the most famous newspapers in Italy and expand at an extremely fast speed. Perhaps the task Carlo assigned to Laurent could be completed in less than 2 years, and Carlo would have more time to plan other things. Time passed quickly, and 3.5 months had passed. Thanks to Garibaldi's huge reputation, although only 2 articles were published in 3.5 months, Sole 24 became one of the most famous newspapers in the entire Italian kingdom and easily achieved a daily sales of 10,000 copies. The Sun is now profitable and is expanding rapidly, leveraging Garibaldi's fame. Also, because it is located in the developed industrial area of northern Italy, there is no obstacle to the expansion of the newspaper. It is expected that the daily sales will exceed 20,000 copies this year, making it a truly large newspaper. This era is different from later generations. Newspapers have become the most effective means for people of this era to learn about news from the outside world. Although only 10,000 copies of the newspaper were sold, more than 10,000 people read it. Considering that each family has 3 to 5 people, the number of people that the Italian Sun can influence is close to 50,000. Thanks to the word of mouth spread of these 50,000 people, the news published in the newspapers could reach the ears of hundreds of thousands of Italians in a short period of time. This is also the power that public opinion can demonstrate. At present, when people's leisure life is not well developed, the power of public opinion that newspapers can demonstrate is enormous. Garibaldi's many military operations, both sons played relatively important roles, like Garibaldi's assistants. Moreover, compared to the elderly Garibaldi, his two sons were in their prime, which is the prime age of a person. To be honest, Carlo was quite envious of Garibaldi's two sons. Although he is not an outstanding military talent compared to Garibaldi, his level is definitely above the standard. He has been influenced by Garibaldi for a long time and his character is not rigid. It's a pity that Carlo is still too young, otherwise he would have tried to invite Giotti to be his palace guard. As time came to June 1866, Carlo's originally calm heart finally became a little nervous. The good news is that the Austro-Prussian War is likely to be staged as it was in history, because there was already a border conflict between Prussia and Austria at the end of May. This was indeed a war that was unavoidable. Influenced by the general trend of German unification, the two great powers within Germany, Prussia and Austria, were destined to win or lose. Fortunately, Italy stood on the side of Prussia, the historical victor, and Italy could achieve a win without doing anything, and easily recaptured the Venice region, while the Austrians were on guard against Prussia. But the bad news is that the Italian army showed an extremely poor side in this war, which set a good precedent for Italy in the First and Second World Wars. If Prussia had not been so powerful at that time, the new kingdom born of Italy would probably have become a meteor passing by quickly on the Apennine Peninsula. For Carlo now, the most difficult problem is how to influence his father Vittorio Emanuele II. Because the Italian army that was quickly defeated was led by his father, Vittorio Emanuele II, and they soon lost their lives. In other words, the battlefield on the southern front had no impact on Prussia in the north. Otherwise, perhaps the world situation would be very different. Carlo understood that with his ability and status, it was impossible for him to influence the development of the Austro-Prussian War. In order to change Italy's poor performance in the Austro-Prussian War, it was necessary to invite Italy's real god of war, Garibaldi, to command the Italian army. But this is precisely the most troublesome problem. Under the current circumstances, it is basically impossible for Victor Emanuele II to agree to let Garibaldi command the Italian army. Carlo had no choice but to save the country in a roundabout way and use another way to encourage Garibaldi to join the war early. As time came to June, the conflict between Prussia and Austria on the border became more and more intense. The two great powers in the north and south of Germany were destined to be unable to coexist peacefully for a long time. Whoever won this conflict would be able to unify the entire German region and realize a strategy of dominating Central Europe. The tense situation affected not only the entire German region, but also Prussia's ally Italy. Victor Emanuele II had called to cabinet meetings regarding the tensions in Germany and had requested that the Italian army be ready at all times. In such a tense situation, Carlo also began his own attempt. My God, Carlo, do you understand what you are saying? In the small luxurious restaurant of the palace, Vittorio Emanuele II, who was eating breakfast comfortably, was surprised at this moment. He looked at his favorite son opposite him and asked in disbelief, will consider the harm of letting you and Garibaldi get close. At this time, Vittorio Emanuele II was more like the king of Italy than an ordinary father. He looked at Carlo with deep and serious eyes and said word by word, please collect, please invest, please recommend, please vote for me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Speak. Carlo understood that, if he could not convince his father at this time, not only would his plan for the Austro-Prussian War disappear into thin air, but even the right to manage his property with great difficulty would once again be supervised by Vittorio Emanuele II. Looking at the serious-looking Vittorio Emanuele II, Carlo organized his words in his mind. Father, I think it would be good to let General Garibaldi prepare the army in advance. There will definitely be a war between Prussia and Austria, and as Prussia's ally, we will inevitably participate in this war. Austria is also our enemy. If we want to regain Venice during this opportunity, we must prepare in advance, rather than wait until the war breaks out and fight hastily. Vittorio Emanuele seconded moderately, and was very satisfied that Carlo could understand this. However, although he was satisfied, it was not easy for Vittorio Emanuele II to compromise when it came to Garibaldi's return to military power. Go on. Vittorio Emanuele II had no expression on his face, and continued to look at Carlo with a serious look. Father, you also know that General Garibaldi has a very high reputation among the Italian people, and can easily organize a powerful army of tens of thousands of people. If we can take advantage of this, and deal an unexpected blow to the Austrian army in Venice, it may speed up our progress in recovering Venice. Carlo continued. Vittorio Emanuele II rubbed his brow and asked, compared to the role these tens of thousands of troops can bring, I'm more worried about the harm these tens of thousands of troops will cause to the kingdom. This is exactly what you don't have to worry about, Father. Carlo said with a smile. Garibaldi's army achieves good results, then you will certainly get the credit. But if Garibaldi fails in the war against Austria, the public's disappointment has nothing to do with you, right? Such means are not unfamiliar to monarchs of various countries, that is, to put themselves in a position where they can share the credit without taking responsibility. However, this did not completely dispel Vittorio Emanuele II's worries. My child, you don't understand how terrible Garibaldi's reputation is among the people. If his reputation is improved again, it will be a fatal blow to the entire Savoy family. Vittorio Emanuele II said to Carlo earnestly. Garibaldi's reputation among the people was already threatening, not to mention that he had once been close to the Republic. This is a great danger for a monarchy, and it is also the reason why Vittorio Emanuele II risked sending a certain number of soldiers to protect Garibaldi. But he is nearly 60 years old, Father. Carlo replied. Garibaldi was old, and that was the only consolation for Vittorio Emanuele II. In this era of extremely poor medical technology, even in Europe, which is already the most developed region in the world, the average life expectancy is still a short 30 to 40 years. Yes, at this time, the average life expectancy in Europe is only more than 30 years old, and it is rare to see someone as close to 60 years old as Garibaldi, which is why Vittorio Emanuele II is more at ease. Looking at Carlo, who kept giving reasons to impress him, Vittorio Emanuele II stared for a long time before he uttered, "My child, I admit that you have a talent for being a diplomat. Do you agree, Father?" Carlo was a little happy and asked impatiently, "I need to discuss with the cabinet. Some things are not something that the king can decide. Do you understand?" Carlo was still unable to hide his feelings freely. Vittorio Emanuele II had complicated feelings. But no matter what, Carlo's cleverness is good for the royal family. Vittorio Emanuele II also needs more helpers to help him stabilize the royal power, especially children like Carlo who are related to him by blood. And even if the cabinet agrees, the country does not have any funds to help Garibaldi rebuild the army. Well, whether the cabinet agrees or not, this matter has nothing to do with you, Carlo. Someone will inform Garibaldi when there is a result. Your first priority now is to complete your studies at the military academy. Vittorio Emanuele II touched his son's head and finally returned to the role of a father. After this conversation, Vittorio Emanuele II was even more excited about Carlo's growth. Although there is only one crown prince, this does not mean that the future crown prince will not need a close assistant. If Amadia and Carlo can both grow into excellent military commanders, then the Kingdom of Italy will have a wonderful situation in the future. That is, the Italian royal army will be completely controlled by the royal family, and the position of the Savoy family will be more stable. I understand, Father. Carlo nodded. Carlo certainly knew that he could not directly persuade Vittorio Emanuele II to agree to let Garibaldi reorganize the army. Although Victor Emmanuel II expressed his intention to seek the advice of the cabinet, if he, the biggest opponent of Garibaldi, did not refuse, the Italian government would surely not refuse the opportunity to obtain tens of thousands of troops for free. As for Garibaldi's military talents, Carlo was not worried at all. In history, whether it was the Austro-Prussian War or the subsequent Franco-Prussian War, Garibaldi demonstrated outstanding military talents. Garibaldi could have joined the war as soon as it broke out. Perhaps the performance of the Italian army on the southern front would not have been so bad. This may have a greater impact on the entire Austro-Prussian War. Italy may be able to gain more benefits in this war, and the position of the Savoy family will be more stable. If this suggestion achieves good results, I believe Carlo's next plans will be smoother. At least it will be much easier to persuade Vittorio Emanuele II. Please collect, recommend, vote for me, and read my book. Chapter 9: The End of the War. The Austro-Prussian War was a war that had been prepared in advance, and the entire German Empire took a very clear stand. The conflict had already begun in April, but due to the hesitation of the Prussian king, Prussia did not begin preparations for war until May. However, for this war, Prussia was obviously the one that was more prepared. The Prussians had already made preparations to unify Germany, while the Austrians were still immersed in the dream of the empire, and did not know that the situation of the Austrian Empire was already very dangerous. As time entered June 1866, the flames on the Prussian-Austrian border were further ignited. The Kingdom of Bavaria in southern Germany attempted to initiate a federal referendum as an opportunity to get both Prussia and Austria to stop preparing for war. But the war preparations of the two countries have reached such a stage that it cannot be stopped by a small Bavaria. After the Iron Chancellor Bismarck declared the Parliament's decision invalid and demanded the dissolution of the Confederation Conference, the whole of Germany began a vigorous campaign to take sides. In addition to determining the outcome of this upcoming war, it will also determine the final ruler of the German region. On the side of Prussia were Muhlenberg, Oldenburg and other northern German states, as well as the three free cities of Hamburg, Bremen, and Lübeck. On the Austrian side stood Saxony, Hanover, Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, Hesse-Kassel, Hesse-Darmstadt and other member states of the German Confederation. In terms of the number of states, population, and area, Austria has an advantage. However, in terms of military strength, Prussia is clearly stronger than the other side. With the official arrival of June 14th, the war that both sides had been preparing for a long time broke out. Carlo was not worried about this war at all. Even if it was just a one-on-one fight between Prussia and Austria, Austria would never be a match for Prussia. Although the Italian army could not play a big role, it was able to tie down part of the Austrian army in the early stages of the war. Moreover, Garibaldi had already prepared an army of more than 10,000 people in advance, so at least this army would not be a drag. If the Austrians had underestimated their enemies, perhaps Italy could not only recover the Venice region, but also lay claim to the long-desired South Tyrol region. It is worth mentioning that, because Vittorio Emanuele II was worried about Garibaldi leading the troops alone, he agreed to Carlo's request, which was to invite Garibaldi's second son, Giuliano, to be Carlo's military attaché in the ducal court. This position does not have any real power. After all, Carlo is not qualified to have a guard team. Giulio's daily task is to accompany Carlo to the military academy to study, and to take care of some chores for Carlo raging. Although the entire battlefield was divided into three parts, the battlefield in Bohemia played a decisive role. This was not only the place where the main forces of the Prussian and Austrian armies exchanged fire, but also the most essential part of the Austrian Empire. The good news is that Carlo can easily get the latest battle reports from the front line with his connections, and then publish them in his own 24-hour Sun. By the way, it occasionally publishes some news about Garibaldi, which has completely secured the position of the Italian 24-hour Sun in the Italian public opinion circle. With the help of the outbreak of the war, the daily sales of the Italian Sun have exceeded 15,000 copies, and are rapidly moving towards 20,000 copies per day. If the printing and communication technologies of the era had not restricted the expansion of newspapers, I'm afraid that Lesole would have taken this opportunity to become the largest newspaper in Italy. The entire war did not last long. Because Prussia was worried that France would interfere, the war started with great fanfare, but ended in a hasty manner. The good news is that Italy managed to get its share of the reward for joining the war, the intact Venetian region and part of South Tyrol. The bad news is that both the Italian army and Victor Emanuele II performed extremely poorly in the war, with the performance of more than 100,000 Italian troops not as good as that of Garibaldi's army of more than 10,000. However, as the saying goes, a flaw does not outweigh the merits. Compared with the national celebration brought about by the recovery of Venice and the annexation of half of South Tyrol, the poor military command of Victor Emanuele II could be actively ignored by the Italian people. At least in this matter, Vittorio Emanuele II and Garibaldi reached a compromise. Garibaldi hoped to see a unified and powerful Italy during his lifetime, while Victor Emanuele II hoped to accomplish the great goal of unifying Italy during his term of office. The two hit it off immediately. It was good for Carlo too. It was Carlo who suggested that Garibaldi recruited soldiers and prepare for war, and it turned out to be very effective. If Garibaldi's army had not played a vital role on the southern battlefield, it would have been very difficult for Italy to recapture Venice, let alone an part of the South Tyrol region. The biggest factor was Prussia's fear of French intervention. In the original history, after the Italian army was defeated, Garibaldi was appointed to take charge of the situation. He used only a hastily assembled army of 38,000 people to defeat the Austrian army many times and almost reach the Tyrol region. But at that time, Prussia was worried about French intervention and demanded that the Italian government withdraw its troops immediately in an extremely tough manner. Garibaldi had no choice but to withdraw from South Tyrol, which meant that Italy only gained the Venice region that the Austrians had voluntarily given up in this war. And now, because of Garibaldi's proactive attack, most of South Tyrol had been conquered before the Prussians asked to withdraw. This also became the confidence for the Italian diplomatic department to ask for South Tyrol. Although in the end they only obtained less than half of South Tyrol, it was still more than what they would have gained originally. Compared to Italy, the Kingdom of Prussia was definitely the country that gained the most from this war. After the war, the German Confederation was dissolved, and Austria lost control of the German region. Prussia suddenly became the leader of all the states in the entire German region, and annexed the Kingdom of Hanover, becoming the new overlord of the German region. This is still very friendly to a country like Italy. With Prussia attracting the attention of Britain and France, Italy can develop in a low-key manner for a period of time, and Carlo does not have to worry that some of his operations will cause greater surprises. Please support me by monthly votes, recommendation tickets, follow-up reading and investment. Chapter 10 Spanish Revolution. Austro-Prussian War can be said to be the only major event before the Spanish Revolution. Carlo's suggestions achieved very good results. The result was that Vittorio Emanuele II paid more attention to Carlo's ideas and allowed Carlo to have greater autonomy. For Carlo, the most important thing at the moment is to find some qualified subordinates for himself, so that at least he does not have to do everything by himself. Although there were servants at the royal palace's disposal, they were, after all, servants of his father, Vittorio Emanuele II, and their loyalty might not be up to paragraph. It is not appropriate for Carlo to get to know some senior military officials and generals with his identity, but it should be no problem for him to get to know some classmates in the military academy. Apart from Giardi, who went to study at the Turin Military Academy with Carlo, the only classmates of the same period who are familiar to Carlo are Andrea Rosso from the infantry major and Carmen Esposito from the artillery major. These two guys were about the same age as Carlo, and were Carlo's best companions in the entire military academy. Andrew Rosso is a short fat man. Although he looks simple and honest, he has a lot of clever ideas. Carlo also likes his quick mind and wild ideas. Carmen Esposito, on the other hand, was completely different. He was tall and thin, and looked malnourished. If Carlo didn't know that Carmen's background would not make him go hungry, he would even suspect that this guy was thin because of hunger all day. The two guys, one fat and one thin, plus Giardi, who is already in his 20s, are the assistants Carlo can rely on temporarily in his plan to were able to enter the Turin Military Academy. Carlo's dress and temperament seemed to be very different from those of ordinary students in the military academy. Perhaps the two of them saw some clues, but they both tacitly kept silent. After all, if Carlo wanted them to know, he would have taken the initiative to tell them. Now that he hadn't told them, it was naturally not the time for them to know. After the Austro-Prussian War, Carlo's daily schedule became very simple. Apart from occasionally asking Lauren about the layout and development of the newspaper, Carlo spent most of his time traveling between the military academy and the royal palace of Turin, occasionally inviting Andrew, Carmen, and Giotti to parties. Although his days were not exciting, they were still enjoyable. While studying at the military academy, Carlo also discovered that the only possible change in himself from the time he traveled through time to now was that his physical fitness had greatly improved. The previous body was very sick, with frequent major and minor illnesses. But since Carlo came into this world, not only has his health completely improved, but he has even become a little stronger through training at the military academy. Carlo has never missed out on his 3 meals a day. Although he is only 15 years old, Carlo is already 1.7 meters tall, which is considered a standard tall guy. Coupled with his handsome looks, the noble temperament of a royal member, and his billions of dollars in wealth, Carlo became the object of admiration of many Italian noble ladies. It was probably because this body was too young, otherwise Carlo would not be able to control his glances at these noble ladies. However, despite the love affair, Carlo still wanted to think carefully about the candidate for his future wife. Although the West does not practice sky-high bride prices, it is undeniable that a good wife can indeed bring huge benefits to oneself. The country behind his wife also helped Carlo. Carlo preferred to choose princesses from the 2 more powerful countries, Germany and Russia. As for France, the current hegemon of Europe, it was not within Carlo's consideration. If the Franco-Prussian War had developed as it did in history, the royal family would not have existed for a few years. The study period at the Turin Military Academy is 3 years, and after graduation one can basically join the Italian army as a junior officer. Of course, if you enter the Turin Military Academy as an active duty officer or soldier, it only takes 2 years to graduate, and your rank will be raised by at least 1 level. Carlo was of course the first choice. If he had enrolled in 1866, he would have had to wait until 1869 to graduate. However, this did not conflict with Carlo's plan. After all, the Spanish Revolution broke out in 1868. After the fall of the First Spanish Republic, the monarchy would be restored in Spain. After graduating from the military academy in 1869, Carlo still had a year to go. When Emanuele became the king of Spain in history, Carlo would be 19 years old, which was within the range of Spain's selection of a king. In the busy military school life, time passed quickly. On May 30th, 1867, Carlo attended the wedding of his brother Emanuele and Maria Vittoria Polzo, and presented them with gifts. In this era, marriages between European royal families were still very chaotic. If Carlo remembered correctly, his brother Emanuele's second marriage was to his sister's daughter, Mary Letizia Bonaparte. There was nothing major in 1867, but the international community in 1868 was still very lively. First, US President Andrew Johnson became the first president in US history to be impeached by Congress, but he was fortunately not impeached by 1 vote, and continued to remain on the presidential throne. Compared to this lucky American president, Queen Isabella II of Spain is not so lucky. As the first generation of the British Empire that has withdrawn from the stage of history, Spain's corrupt royal rule has already shown an extremely serious polarization. The aristocracy was extravagant and made a fortune in railway and real estate investment. The residence built by an Andalusian guard in Madrid was ridiculed by the public as being covered with diamonds, which was enough to prove the luxurious life of the Spanish aristocracy. But in contrast, the peasants and workers in Spain lived a hard life. Peasants only had the right to use the land, but not the ownership of it, and the bad economy caused factories in Spain to close down one after another. The impoverished peasants and workers launched demonstrations and uprisings again and again, which were brutally suppressed by the Spanish government, but the people's anger continued to accumulate. Finally, the anger was ignited. In September 1868, exiled soldiers led by Francisco Serrano and supporters of Juan Bautista Topper, who had been elected to the House of Representatives, launched a larger uprising. Because it broke out in September, this revolution is also called the September Revolution by the Spanish people. The corrupt royal government was unable to suppress the explosive revolution. Peasants and workers actively joined the uprising, which swept across most of Spain in a short period of time. What's worse is that Queen Isabella II of Spain's control over the army was not so perfect. The soldiers had no good feelings towards this absurd and extravagant queen. The defection of a large number of government troops accelerated the process of the Spanish Revolution, and the Spanish kingdom was destroyed. Please collect. Please vote for monthly tickets. Please recommend. Please invest. Chapter 11. We want bread, not a republic. Seeing the Spanish Revolution spreading rapidly to Madrid like a raging fire, Queen Isabella, who had an extremely chaotic private life, finally panicked. Faced with the choice of resistance or escape, Queen Isabel did not hesitate at all, and hurriedly fled north to France with her family. The Queen's escape also accelerated the Spanish Revolution. The Revolutionary Army easily entered Madrid, and declared the end of the Kingdom of Spain. On October 8, 1868, Francisco Serrano appointed himself as the president of the provisional government, and Juan Primo, who was quite prestigious in the Revolutionary Army, served as the Minister of War of the provisional government. Spain officially entered a state of extreme chaos patriots to launch an uprising near Yala in the eastern province of Arlite, and issued a GURA call to all regions of Cuba, calling on all Cubans to fight for freedom, equality, and independence. This was a heavy blow to the hastily established Spanish provisional government, as Cuba was one of the few remaining colonies of Spain that could generate positive returns. Cuba's War of Independence not only forced the Spanish provisional government to send troops to suppress the war, but also forced the new government to face huge military expenditures under extremely difficult financial circumstances. But this was not the only problem facing the provisional government. The revolution was successful, but the provisional government did not yet control all of Spain. At the same time, the biggest challenge at present is how to stabilize the rule of the provisional government and establish an administrative system that is completely different from the former monarchical government. Moreover, the provisional government was not a monolithic entity. The relationships between the various classes and forces were hostile to each other. The chaotic situation of the provisional government was not much better than that of the former Spanish royal government. The initiators of this revolution were the Spanish upper bourgeoisie and liberals. Their original intention was to overthrow the former democratic monarchy and establish a monarchy with power concentrated in the national government. But the petty bourgeoisie, workers, and peasants in Spain had had enough of the oppression of the monarchy and the aristocracy. They wanted to establish a federal republican government with decentralized power but unified management, and agreed to replace the king with a president, to unify the management of the whole of Spain. Carlo was also paying close attention to the situation in Spain. The good news was that Italy and Spain were separated by the sea and only separated by France on land, so news could be transmitted quickly. What Carlo was most reluctant to hear at this time was that the Spanish provisional government decided to abolish the monarchy, which also meant that Carlo would completely lose connection with the Spanish throne. On November 9th, the Spanish provisional government finally issued a decree on the establishment of parliament and announced that parliamentary elections would be held next year, in February 1869. Although the decree does not mention the composition of the future Spanish government, everyone who follows Spanish news understands that the results of the parliamentary elections will determine the fate of Spain. If big capital and liberal reformers gain a majority in parliament, the new parliament will have the power to enact a bill on constitutional monarchy. Similarly, once the working or peasant class obtains the majority in parliament, the Spanish monarchy may be destroyed, and a republic may very well come to the Spanish stage. As it stands, there is a high probability that the situation in Spain will develop as it has in history. Prime, who supports constitutional monarchy, still controls the Spanish government, and is likely to gain an advantage in parliamentary elections in a few months. The timing of the parliamentary election is also worth pondering. It took only 4 months from the establishment of the provisional government to the parliamentary election, and less than 3 months from the promulgation of the decree to the parliamentary election. It will be difficult to change the attitude of the Italian people in these 3 months, nor will it be possible to change the power of the nobles and big capital in Spain. However, in order to make his plan more secure, Carlo decided to spread some news to the Spanish people. What news? Of course, it was to promote the monarchy. As for the harm that the Spanish Bourbon dynasty brought to the Spanish people, it can all be attributed to the rule of the licentious and immoral Queen Isabella. Carlo also had reasons to advocate the monarchy. The strongest navy in the world is definitely the United Kingdom, which is a constitutional monarchy. The old European powers Russia, the Austrian Empire and the emerging power Kingdom of Prussia were all monarchies. Even Italy, which had just achieved unification and joined the ranks of great powers, was a monarchy. Looking around the world, the only non-monarchy country among the great powers is the United States, and the United States is not that powerful in the eyes of Europeans at this time. The rise of the United States had to wait until after World War I and World War II, such an exaggerated industrial and economic scale. Since most of the powerful countries in Europe are monarchies, why would the Spaniards voluntarily abandon this very advanced system? As for the failure of the monarchy in the past, it was all the fault of the Bourbon family and Queen Isabella. If you want to blame someone, just blame Queen Isabella. In addition to wanting to retain a little trust in the monarchy in the hearts of the Spanish people, Carlo also wanted to make the Spanish people hate the Bourbon dynasty and Queen Isabella as much as possible. Only in this way will the Spanish be less averse to foreign dynasties, and Carlo's hope of ruling Spain will be much greater. As for the Bourbon family, Queen Isabella and the famous Alfonso XII, they have been sucking the blood of Spain for decades, and it is time for them to make some contribution to the Spanish. And this is not a smear on the Bourbons. Queen Isabella's reign in Spain was well known, characterized by debauchery, tyranny, and chaos. If the Spaniards could be made to no longer trust the Bourbon dynasty, the Carlist rebellion that had plagued Spain for so long could be properly resolved. After all, the Carlist faction was also from the Bourbon family, and they had contributed to the chaos in Spain. On November 27, 1868, the popular Italian newspaper Sol 24 published an article titled "We Want Bread, Not a Republic," which quickly spread to northern and southern Italy. The main content of this article is to talk about the advancement of the monarch currently and the success of major monarchical countries in Europe, and it states that monarchy is the most reasonable choice for European countries, and that the republic is a deformed evolution for Europe. Regardless of whether this article makes sense or not, for the European monarchies at that time, such articles were definitely better than nothing. It is better to publish such articles in newspapers than those advocating republicanism, freedom, and democracy. At least such reports will not make the people dissatisfied with the throne of the monarch. With no objection from any country, the report began to spread on a small scale along the Mediterranean coast, especially in the Mediterranean countries centered on Italy. Ask for recommendation tickets and monthly tickets. Ask for follow-up reading and investment. And also ask for some comments from the book review circle to make it look more lively. Readers can also join the old book group if they have anything to communicate. There is no new book group for the time being. Chapter 12. When the wall falls, everyone pushes it. The evolution of various political systems seems complicated. It is ultimately caused by the people's dissatisfaction with those in power. This actually means that there is no difference between monarchy and parliamentary republic. The most fundamental issue is whether the people's needs can be met, which will evolve into Europeans' dissatisfaction with those in power and the government, and is also the real reason for the revolution as possible. Perhaps such a revolution would not have happened, and the Spanish monarchy would have continued to exist. This also means that Spain's problems were actually very serious. The people were already starving and could no longer survive, so the revolution broke out. The reports published by Carlo in the newspapers delved into the Spanish problem itself, which is the most fundamental demand of the Spanish people, which is to improve the quality of life. Eating bread and drinking milk. Although this seems to be a very normal requirement, it was very difficult in 1868, more than 100 years ago. Even if it is simplified to levels to the simplest level of being well fed and well watered, the Spanish royal government cannot satisfy it. All Carlo had to do was to put all the blame on Queen Isabel and the Bourbon dynasty, and whitewash the monarchy as much as possible. Later, on November 30th, 1868, in Madrid, Spain, General, there is a report from Italy that I need your attention. After a busy day, Primo was about to finish his work, but was interrupted by a sentence from his subordinate. A report from Italy? Primo was a little surprised and asked, "What wind can blow the report from Italy to Spain?" "It's a report about the monarchy in the Republic, General." The subordinate handed over a newspaper with a clear, printed title in the middle. "We need bread, not a republic." Interesting. Primo didn't intend to take the newspaper, but after seeing the title on the newspaper, he took it and opened it to read. This report was reprinted by a how. "Is this report spreading in other places?" Primo asked a strange question after reading the entire report. In addition to a small-scale spread in Madrid, it has also spread to a small extent in Barcelona, Valencia and Valladolid, and newspapers have reported such news. Primo smiled, with a hint of deep meaning in his eyes, and said jokingly, "It seems that someone deliberately put this report on my desk. General, I..." Just as the subordinate was about to explain, Primo interrupted him, and said with a smile, "Okay, of course I believe in your loyalty. What I mean is that might have already set their sights some owns on Spain. The fact that a report from Italy could be widely circulated in so many cities in a short period of time proves that the enemy is definitely well prepared. It would be fine if this revolution happened by coincidence, but it would be really worrying if our revolution was predicted by the guys behind this." Looking at his subordinate who was worried, Primo patted his shoulder and comforted him. "Okay, I don't have any doubts about you. Now I will give you a task. Go to Italy to investigate the source of this report, and then find out all the people in the newspaper." Although he was wondering what exactly this report was trying to accomplish, it was still very useful to Primo at the moment. The simplest example given is completely irrefutable, because the powerful European countries at that time were all monarchies. This will also help Primo to extend the new government towards a constitutional monarchy and realize his ideal reforms of Spain by concentrating power in the national government. Why was Primo against the Republic? Because the Republican system proposed by the farmers and workers is a loose Spanish federation, which will not only set off waves of independence in various regions of Spain that already have the intention of independence, but also cause the Spanish government to lose control over various regions. The reformists wanted a stable government that could implement reforms, not a decentralized and chaotic government, which is why Primo ultimately chose a constitutional monarchy. As one of the most powerful people in the Spanish revolutionary ranks, Primo's opinion played a great influence. The Spanish provisional government did not stop the spread of this report, and even the big capitalists helped the report spread to more Spanish cities. Thanks to the discussion heated by this report, Spaniards also began to discuss the pros and cons of the monarchy and the responsibility of the overthrown Queen Isabella II. It is impossible to save the country in a time of crisis, but the capitalists are very good at shifting the blame and shirking their responsibilities. Since Queen Isabella has lost the throne, and the interim government has no intention of welcoming back Queen Isabella or Prince Alfonso, so why not add insult to injury now? Would he have to wait until others shifted all the responsibility onto himself and that damn queen? For their own interests, capitalists will not show any mercy. From December onwards, the weather in Madrid becomes even colder, at least for Bourbones. Isabella II's reputation could no longer be described as bad, because it was already quite bad before. The people's anger was transferred to Queen Isabella by the capitalists and some nobles with ulterior motives. The factory owners and nobles who once frantically exploited the Spaniards at least no longer had to worry about being shot in the back. But this was not a good thing for Queen Isabella, who was far away in France, because she was still thinking about finding an opportunity to restore the throne. However, not all nobles were happy at this time. The Carlos faction, who was from the same family as Queen Isabel, was not in a very good mood at this time. Queen Isabella's bad reputation affected the Bourbon dynasty. As a member of the Bourbon dynasty, Carlos VII had no less troubles than Queen Isabella at this time. More importantly, after many generations of inheritance, the Carlos sect is no longer recognized by most people, especially after the Second Carolist War. Carlos VI came to power and became the ruling Carolist party. But within a few years, the self-proclaimed King of Spain was arrested by government forces, and Carlos VI was forced to give up his right to the throne. Juan, the younger brother of Carlos VI, took advantage of the situation and became Juan III, the King of Spain, as declared by the Carolists without any preparation. but the Carolists did not support the king who picked up the crown. In addition, Carlos VI was released soon after being forced to give up his right to the throne, so the Carolists had a situation of two kings coexisting. The king was originally a self-entertaining king who was not recognized by the majority, and there was a situation of two kings coexisting, and the support for the Carolists continued to decline. Although Carlos VI died soon after without any offspring, Juan III, the so-called claimant to the throne, still did not receive strong support from the Carolists, which led to the fact that the Carlosists were completely unable to stop the Spanish Revolution, and had no power to put Juan III on the throne. Since starting his public opinion campaign, Carlo has always focused on the situation in Spain. Carlo finally breathed a sigh of relief after learning that the report was widely reprinted and circulated throughout Spain. But soon, Carlo began to have new worries. Such an action was completely inconsistent with history, and it was certainly not just Carlo who contributed to the widespread dissemination of the report in Spain Republic. Carlo would regret it to death. But Carlo doesn't have any better solution now. He can only pray that General Primo, who has historically supported the monarchy, can be as powerful as in history, win a majority of seats in the Spanish parliamentary elections, become the prime minister of the Spanish government in one fell swoop, and control the entire Spanish government. Please give me monthly votes and recommendation tickets. Please read my articles and invest in me. Chapter 13 about the Spanish Carlist sect. Although most readers who are familiar with Spanish history are familiar with the Carolists, it is not ruled out that there are still many readers who are not familiar with Spanish history, or are relatively unfamiliar with the Carolists. The author will give a brief explanation of the Spanish Carolists here, and readers who are familiar with this period of history can skip it. Before Queen Isabella, Spain had a male-based inheritance law, so there was no such thing as the Carlist faction. But Queen Isabella's father, Ferdinand VII, had only two daughters. In order to keep the throne in his own family, Ferdinand temporarily amended the inheritance law to allow Isabel to obtain the right of inheritance. Forget about changing the succession law. Isabel is only 3 years old and clearly not suitable to be king. This made Prince Carlos, the younger brother of Ferdinand VII, who was supposed to inherit the throne, dissatisfied. In addition, the nobles who originally supported the Salic law of succession, male inheritance, united together and called Prince Carlos Carlos V as the origin of the Carolists. Book lovers can search on Baidu for the subsequent Carlos Wars. They all failed anyway. In short, the Carolists are the Bourbon faction fighting for the throne, but they are still the Bourbon family in the final analysis. Highlights. In addition, I'm asking for monthly tickets, follow-up reading, recommendation tickets, and investment for my new book. If you have anything to discuss, you can also discuss it in the book review area. The author will read the book reviews and answer them when he is free. Recommendation tickets, monthly tickets, follow-up reading, investment, whatever you want, I beg you. Chapter 14 Spanish King Election. Time quickly came to 1869. Although there is no news from Spain yet, Carlo is already making full preparations for the possibility of taking over Spain. First of all, the public opinion force that Carlo has vigorously developed has achieved certain results. The largest newspaper in Carlo's hands, Il Sole 24 had become the largest newspaper in northern Italy, with an average daily sales of more than 24,000 copies in 1868. In addition to the Sun, Lauren also founded several newspapers in northern and southern Italy under Carlo's instructions. The combined daily sales of these small and medium-sized newspapers amounts to more than 10,000 copies. Carlo has also completed his initial deployment of public opinion. The various newspapers have tens of thousands of loyal readers and can influence at least hundreds of thousands of people. As long as Carlo wanted, he could make hundreds of thousands or even millions of Italians aware of a piece of news in a short period of time. This is extremely exaggerated in that era, when transportation was extremely inconvenient and people mostly relied on horses, ox carts and other livestock to travel. These newspapers, large and small, also brought Carlo an income of nearly 250,000 liras in 2.5 years. Thanks to Garibaldi's reputation, the Sun was able to quickly penetrate the market. Otherwise more than 200,000 lire would not be so easy to earn. As time entered February 1869, the Spanish parliamentary election officially arrived. As in history, Primo, as the most powerful individual in the provisional government, coupled with his great reputation among the revolutionary army, successfully controlled the majority of seats in parliament. This news made Carlo feel relieved. It meant that Spain would move towards a constitutional monarchy, rather than a republic, and Carlo still had a great hope of becoming the King of Spain. As soon as the new Spanish parliament was established, it announced that it would not abolish the monarchy, but would establish national government under a constitutional monarchy to manage Spanish affairs. Because the Spanish throne was unresolved, the parliament appointed the prime minister of the interim government, Francisco Serrano Domínguez, as regent of the Kingdom of Spain, and the Minister of War Primo as the new prime minister. These two people were not only the two most prestigious people in the provisional government, but also two highly supported generals in the revolutionary army. This is actually the real reason why Spain continues to maintain the monarchy. After all, the two people with decision-making power both support the monarchy. Thanks to the report promoting the advanced monarchy, the news that Spain continued to maintain the monarchy did not cause much waves. As long as Spain is no longer ruled by a tyrant like Queen Isabella, the Spanish people's opposition will at least not be so intense. The affairs of the parliament have come to an end for the time being. The most troublesome thing for Serrano and Prime Minister Primo has become choosing a suitable king for Spain. Although they can choose freely among European royal families, the person they choose must also be recognized by the people that such a king can do better than Isabel. If only a new Queen Isabel came to rule Spain, what would be the Spanish Revolution? A king with a controversial origin cannot be accepted. For Spain, a king with a noble origin and the support of a big family can stabilize the order of Spain. A month of screening, Serrano and Primo finally finalized a list of 5 people. The first choice was Leopoldo, a prince of the German royal family. Born into the Hohenzollern family, with the support of the Kingdom of Prussia, which had just won the Austro-Prussian War, his origin and reputation met Spain's requirements. The second choice is Ferdinand, who served as the regent of Portugal. Ferdinand's wife and son were both kings of Portugal. His performance as the King of Portugal, the Queen's husband, and as regent, was above the passing line, and his reputation was also quite good. The third choice is Prince Emanuele of the Savoy dynasty in Italy. After the unification of Italy, it still has a say on the Mediterranean coast, and the prestige of the Savoy family in the European royal family has also seen a slight increase. For Spain, Emanuele may not be as reliable as the first two, but he is also a qualified candidate. The fourth choice was also from the Savoy dynasty of Italy, Emanuele's younger brother Carlo. Carlo's disadvantage was that he was a little young, and he was still a few months away from turning 18. But Carlo's reputation in Italy was no less than Emanuele's, and the son's publicity for Carlo was still very effective. Even many Italians like this youngest prince very much, because he is not too arrogant when traveling, and greets Italian people in a friendly manner. Under the influence of public opinion, some Spaniards also heard about the friendly Prince of Italy. This is why Carlo was included in the candidate list. After all, Primo and Serrano both believed that the Spaniards would not reject a friendly king. The last candidate was Queen Isabel's brother-in-law, the Duke of Pontepechil of Spain. However, considering the Spanish people's dislike for Queen Isabel and the possible hatred of the whole family, Primo ranked the Duke of Pontepechil at the end of the candidate list and considered removing him from the list. After all, the selection of the King of Spain is extremely strict. Any shortcomings of the candidate will be magnified countless times, and any possible impact must be taken into consideration by Serrano and Primo. What disappointed Primo was that, as soon as the Spanish government gave Fernando a hint of the truth, Fernando directly refused the Spanish throne. This also theoretically cuts off the possibility of Spain and Portugal uniting again. After all, Ferdinand's son is the current King of Portugal. If Fernando could obtain the Spanish throne, the future King of Portugal would have the possibility of inheriting the Spanish throne and realizing the merger of the two Iberian countries. Fernando's voluntary withdrawal reduced the 5-man list to 4. After a long discussion with Serrano, Primo finally decided to remove the Duke of Pontepons from the list, which left only 3 candidates. Although the selection of the king in Spain is kept relatively secret, there is no impenetrable wall in the world. At this time, Primo and Serrano were still unaware of the significant impact their king selection would have on the European situation, and it might even directly cause the European hegemon to be trampled under the feet of other countries. First update, please support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15, The War of the King. In Spain, and the establishment of a provisional government attracted the attention of many European countries. After the Spanish parliament announced that it would not abolish the monarchy and would look for a new king, many countries remained eager to watch the fun and were also curious about which lucky person would be the new king of Spain. But soon, the French government could no longer laugh, because according to news from Spain, among the many candidates for the king of Spain, Prince Leopoldo of the Hohenzollern family ranks at the top and is very likely to become the next king of Spain. There are many Leopold princes in Germany. The candidate for the throne here is Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern, not the Bavarian one. Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern is the father of King Ferdinand I of Romania. This was fatal to the French. Prussia alone had already posed a huge threat to France. Especially after defeating Austria, the threat Prussia brought to France was unprecedented. If the Hohenzollern family were allowed to obtain the Spanish crown, France would be faced with being attacked from both Prussia and Spain. Although Spain is not a powerful country and can only be considered a second-rate country in Europe, it is located in the south of France and has the Pyrenees Mountains as a natural defense line. Prussia only needed to stockpile less than 100,000 troops in Spain to cause great trouble to the French and threaten many cities in southern France. On June 21, 1869, the angry French government expressed strong opposition to the Spanish and German governments and stated that when Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern was crowned King of Spain, it was time for France to declare war on Prussia and Spain. The threat from the European hegemon was still very useful. King William I of Prussia retreated somewhat under such threats and even publicly expressed his disapproval of his cousin Prince Leopold inheriting the Spanish throne. The Spanish government was also a little panicked. If a war broke out with France, because of their choice of king, it would undoubtedly be a loss. William I's concession made the French government is very satisfied, and they also relaxed their vigilance against Prussia, which had just defeated Austria. The French ambassador to Prussia even sought an audience with William I in early July, and conveyed the attitude of French Emperor Napoleon III, who hoped that William I would guarantee that he would not ask for the candidacy he had given up in the future. Such a request was absolutely rude, which made William I, who had originally planned to give in, feel a little dissatisfied. The French would never have thought that even when William I was retreating, there were still more stubborn people in Germany who were already preparing for war with France. William I was somewhat annoyed by the rude treatment of the French ambassador. He sent an urgent telegram to his Prime Minister Bismarck on the same day, hoping that Bismarck could come up with a reasonable solution to the crisis facing Prussia. But William I did not expect that Bismarck's so-called solution to the crisis was to defeat France through war, which was to solve the problem itself, and even a smile appeared on his face. After asking Chief of the General Staff Moltke whether he was sure of victory in the war against France, and receiving an affirmative answer, Bismarck decided not to wait any longer. He significantly revised the content of William I's telegram, deleting all the words about long-term consideration and euphemistic concessions, and added some words to stimulate the French government and officials at the end of the telegram. Due to your unreasonable demands and attitude, His Majesty King William I has decided to refuse to approach the French ambassador from now on, and only conveyed to your country through this telegram that there is nothing more to discuss between our two countries. Although this telegram used to stimulate the French government was not originally sent directly to the French government's radio station, it was published in major Prussian newspapers in the form of open news, and spread to the whole of Europe through all Prussian missions abroad. Carlo probably didn't expect that his slight action would directly affect the world, and bring the Franco-Prussian War forward by a year. On July 11, 1869, the French government expelled the Prussian ambassador to France after several days of preparation, and announced the war between the two countries to the Prussian ambassador to France with a blank face. But the French did not see the expected panic and angry nervousness on the Prussian ambassador's face. They could only watch the Prussian ambassador walk out of the embassy with a relaxed look on his face and get on the train back to Prussia. Even more confused than the French was King William I of Prussia. Although William I was at the French rudeness, he really did not think of going to war with the French at such a time. But things had come to such a point that William I could not stop the angry war. On July 12, William I announced a general mobilization in the North German Confederation and called on all states in the Confederation to fight for Germany. Prussia called this war the Franco-German War, trying to unite Germany by asking the various states to contribute troops and manpower. The French also called this war the Franco-German War, and the feud between the French and the German region has been going on for a long time. In this situation, no matter who was the winner of the Franco-Prussian War, Prince Leopold of Prussia was no longer suitable to continue to be the King of Spain. In addition, Prince Leopold himself publicly refused to inherit the Spanish throne. Although it was more because William I stood up to oppose it, it was Prince Leopold himself who gave up after all. After all these events, the original 5 candidates for the Spanish throne were reduced to 2 princes from the Italian House of Savoy. Whether Emanuele or Carlo became King of Spain, Savoy would be the ultimate winner. Aside from the Savoy dynasty, which both have, Emanuele has the advantage of being older and more mature, while Carlo has the advantage of having a friendly reputation that may be more acceptable to the Spanish and is more likely to support reform. From the perspective of reform, Primo undoubtedly supports Carlo as the King of Spain. After all, although Primo supports the monarchy, he is a thorough reformer. Cyrano is more like a neutral party between the reformists and conservatives, and can also be classified as a royalist from the aristocratic line. Both of them were undecided between Emanuele and Carlo. For the stability of the Kingdom of Spain, Primo decided to go to Italy in person to inspect the 2 princes and determine the final candidate for the King of Spain during this inspection. Cyrano agreed to Primo's proposal and expressed his support for either Emanuele or Carlo to become the King of Spain and his willingness to be loyal to the new king. Second update, please support. Chapter 16 Investigation. We have to admit that throughout the history of Italy's unification, apart from the unexpected factor of Garibaldi, the rest can be collectively said to be entirely based on luck, without any real strength. The Austro-Prussian War allowed Italy to easily gain the Venetian region and the southern part of South Tyrol. The Franco-Prussian War triggered by the Spanish throne also gave the Italians an opportunity to regain Rome. At this time, the Catholic Church, also known as the Papal States, was entrenched in Rome. The Papal States were supported by the European hegemon, France, which was why Italy, although it had been unified, had been unable to regain the core Roman region. But after the outbreak of the war, the French troops stationed in Rome began to gradually withdraw. Italy is waiting for the time when all French troops will be withdrawn. The army of the Holy See will not be able to stop the pace of Italian unification, and Rome will soon become the official capital of the Kingdom of Italy. Just as Vittorio Emanuele II was anxiously waiting for the French army to completely withdraw from Rome, the Spanish government also requested a diplomatic visit to the Italian government. The delegation sent by Spain this time was very luxurious, led by Prime Minister Primo, accompanied by several government ministers and several senior generals of the Spanish military. Combined with the recent Spanish king election, Vittorio Emanuele II seemed to have some understanding of the purpose of this diplomatic visit to Spain. However, there was one thing that Vittorio Emanuele II did not quite understand. That is, when the Spanish government examined candidates from other countries, it only investigations conducted in secret. How come when it comes to Italy, it becomes a diplomatic mission to visit? And the leader of the mission is the new Spanish Prime Minister Primo, who is a man who is in charge of both military and political affairs. It is absolutely no exaggeration to call him the most powerful person in Spain today. Although Italy did not quite understand Primo's intention, Spain is, after all, a big country on the Mediterranean coast, and Italy would naturally not reject the Spanish government's proactive visit. Carlo, who was always paying attention to news from Spain, naturally learned about the Spanish government's request for a diplomatic visit to Italy. Carlo couldn't help but have more guesses about this matter that had never happened in history. If Amadia's name was the only one on the Spanish list of candidates for the throne, they would most likely not come to Italy. After all, 3 of the 4 major competitors in history have withdrawn. If there were no other competitors, Amadia should have won. Combined with the Spanish government's request for a diplomatic visit, Carlo can basically conclude that he should also be on the candidate list for the Spanish throne, and has reached the final round of competition with his brother Amadia. This also means that the candidate for the Spanish throne will be revealed with Primo's diplomatic visit. If Carlo wants to become the King of Spain, he must seize all opportunities during this diplomatic visit and show Primo his strengths. The good news is that historically Amadia became King of Spain, not because of how outstanding he was. In fact, compared with the other 3 candidates, Amadia was only barely qualified. It was precisely because of the Portuguese regent Fernando's voluntary withdrawal and the French's strong opposition to Prince Leopold becoming the King of Spain that Amadia took advantage and won in the end. However, compared with Carlo, Amadia also has advantages. First of all, he is 6 years older. At the age of 25, he looks more mature and stable, which is quite important for Spain. But Carlo is not without merits. Carlo is definitely more familiar with the 2 current rulers of Spain than Amadia. Compared to Primo's pursuit of Spain, Amadia's age advantage of only 6 years is actually nothing. Moreover, for Primo, who holds military and political power, he may not be willing to see a more mature and stable king compete for power to show his advantages in this diplomatic visit and make Primo choose him. The first thing to do is to recognize your own identity. In fact, no matter whether Amadia or Carlo became the King of Spain, it was impossible for them to hold too much real power in the early stages. It would be good if he had the support of Primo and Serrano, as these 2 people hold military and political power and will be a great help to the king's circumstances. Carlo's initial plan, after becoming King of Spain, was never to seize power, but to help Primo and Serrano carry out reforms in Spain on the basis of stabilizing his own throne. Although Spain is still a second-rate country in Europe, it has already opened up a huge gap with the great powers such as Britain, France, Prussia, Russia, and Austria. Even Italy, which was just unified not long ago, has surpassed Spain in terms of comprehensive strength. If Spain does not reform and continues to waste time like this, it will even become a third-rate country in Europe. Both Primo and Serrano have great reputations. If they take the initiative to carry out reforms in Spain, it will be smoother than if Carlo pushes for reforms himself, and the Spaniards will be more receptive. More importantly, both Primo and Serrano were willing to see a monarch who supported reform emerge in Spain. Especially Primo, as the most powerful man in Spain, he is a thorough reformer. Although Primo was assassinated before Amadia arrived in Spain in history, he promoted the promulgation of many decrees in the short time he became Prime Minister of Spain, and was also a representative figure of the Spanish reformers. If Carlo can show his support for reform during Primo's visit to Italy, I believe he will win Primo's favor. As long as either Primo or Serrano supported him, Carlo did not think that he would lose to his brother Amadia in the competition for the throne. After all, Amadia did not show any talent during the 3 years he was King of Spain, and he did not even have much ambition or aspirations. First update, please support. Chapter 17 Father and Son Dialogue. Carlo finally met Primo, the leader of the Spanish Revolutionary Army, who came from an officer's family and had experienced many wars, now looked like a gentleman and was very friendly and kind. At the welcome banquet, held by his father, Vittorio Emanuele II, Carlo not only met Primo, but also had a very brief but pleasant conversation with Primo. Yes, Marquis Primo. Carlo nodded, not surprised by Primo's question. The content published in the Italian newspaper Il Sole and the Sun is an important means for Carlo to create more advantages for himself. Carlo would be surprised if he couldn't attract Primo's attention. I read the report of the Sun. The editor-in-chief of the newspaper is definitely very thoughtful. I heard that you have also reached a cooperation with General Garibaldi, Primo asked with a smile on his face and a curious look. Yes, Marquis Primo. General Garibaldi is an important contributor to the unification of Italy. It is our honor for the son to reach a cooperation with him. Carlo also smiled and nodded. The most basic etiquette still needs to be followed. Garibaldi was the first question Primo used to test Carlo. After all, Garibaldi had once supported the Republic. If Carlo supported the monarchy, he would definitely not have much affection for such a republican. The conversation ended so briefly that even Carlo was a little surprised. If Carlo was not sure that there would be no problem with his answer, he would even suspect that there was a mistake in his answer, which made Primo decide to give up supporting him. As for Primo, after a brief contact with the two Italian princes, he decided to take his next step, which was to investigate and understand the two princes in person. Both Amadia and Carlo have lived in Italy for more than 10 or even 20 years experiences. It is still possible to investigate the two princes from childhood to adulthood and their attitudes towards certain things, especially Garibaldi's attitude and ideas about reform. What Primo was actually most concerned about was the two princes' desire for power and their support for reform. To be honest, Primo did not want to welcome a king who was fighting for power. Military and political power was a necessary condition for Primo to implement reforms, and he would not allow the new king to compete with him for military and political power as soon as he took office. There is no need for many reforms. If the new king does not support reforms, Primo will not support the new king. As it concerns whether Spain can achieve revival at a certain point in the future, Primo will not have any emotional factors other than rationality in choosing the king of Spain. Even if he liked Carlo better, it would be impossible for him to decide on the candidate for the King of Spain before finishing his investigation of the two princes. Seeing Primo talking to his two sons one after another, but not saying a word to his crown prince Umberto, Vittorio Emanuele II instantly understood Primo's true intention. It turns out that Primo came to Spain not to examine a particular prince, but to examine his two sons and choose one of them to become the King of Spain. In theory, this was a good thing for the House of Savoy, which was based only in Italy. If the Savoy dynasty could be established in Spain, the status of the Savoy family in European royal families would be further enhanced, which would also be a good thing for Vittorio Emanuele II himself. But as a father, Victor Emanuele II did not want to see any of his children go to Spain. Spain was too chaotic now, and it would not be easy to stabilize it without the ability. More importantly, although Spain is only separated from Italy by the Mediterranean Sea, it is like a natural barrier given the extremely inconvenient transportation conditions today. Although the distance from Madrid to Rome is only a little over 1,000 kilometers, a round trip takes at least a week. Whether traveling from Rome to Madrid or from Madrid to Rome, the journey will take at least half a month. For Vittorio Emanuele II and the child who was about to become the King of Spain, it was not always possible to spare a few weeks of free time in a year. Vittorio Emanuele II, who finally understood all this, decided to have a talk with his two children. The first person Vittorio Emanuele II found was his youngest son, Carlo, who had just graduated from the Turin Military Academy and was awarded the rank of captain in the Royal Italian Army. Carlo had also anticipated the arrival of Vittorio Emanuele II and appeared very calm. Vittorio Emanuele II seemed to see his former ambitious self. "Carlo, you have been prepared for this, right?" Vittorio Emanuele II didn't know how to start, and after a moment of silence, he said, "When I founded the Sun, I thought of using it as a form of publicity and was waiting for opportunities like the one in Spain. I'm not content to be just the Duke of the Kingdom, but you know, I can't be the King of Italy, right?" Carlo didn't know how to explain, so he could only try to express his ambitions in a euphemistic way. Vittorio Emanuele II nodded. Although Carlo was still the third in line to the Italian throne, that was only because the offspring of Crown Prince Umberto and Prince Amadia had not yet been born. When their offspring are born, Carlo's succession will drop further. This also means that the third in line may be the closest to the Italian throne for Carlo, and it is basically impossible for Carlo to become the King of Italy. Victor Emanuele II naturally understood this, and in fact, he had no objection to Carlo and Amadia becoming kings of Spain. But Vittorio Emanuele II was old after all, and the old king was reluctant to let his son go to a distant place. But no matter how reluctant he was, Vittorio Emanuele II knew that he should not stand up against his son. "I understand." Carlo, taller than him, touched Carlo's head and said with a hint of reluctance, "I will not interfere with your competition with Amadia. No matter who of you becomes the king of Spain, I will express my support. Even if you become the king of Spain and find that it is not easy to be a qualified king and want to give up, Italy will always welcome you. My child, I'm your father, and I will never oppose you. I also hope that you can understand that no matter whether you are the King of Spain or the Duke of Italy, you and I, as well as Umberto and Amadia, our blood relationship will never change, and the glory of Savoy will always be with us." Second update, please support. Chapter 18 Winning. Primo's inspection was soon over, and he told Vittorio Emanuele II, the final candidate for king. Yes, Carlo had won the competition between him and Amadia and was about to become the new king of Spain. The reason why Carlo won the competition was actually more because of Carlo's support for reform and Garibaldi's praise for Carlo. When Juan Primo Patres was drawing up a list of candidates for the Spanish throne, he once said with king emotion, "Looking for a who supports democracy in Spain is like looking for an atheist in heaven." Although a constitutional system was nominally established during Isabella's reign, Queen Isabella still held a great deal of power and the royal government was quite ignorant and feudal. Primo was tired of this extreme authoritarianism. When looking for a new king for Spain, Primo repeatedly mentioned the need for reform and democratization. The king can hold power, but he must never monopolize it. At this point, Carlo, who had had contact with Garibaldi, who once supported the Republic, was clearly at an advantage. Amadia has no disadvantages, and his age is even an advantage. If Spain is in a stable state, Amadia will definitely be the candidate for the King of Spain. But now Spain is in tatters, and Amadia is powerless to change the current situation in Spain. If Spain is to undergo deep reforms, the monarch and his subjects must work together to promote comprehensive reforms in Spain. In this regard, Carlo will have more advantages than Amadia. Even if Carlo's support for reform is not as firm as expected, Primo can still force the reform through military and political monopoly. After all, a 19-year-old king is easier to control than a 25-year-old king, which is very important for Spain's reforms. There is also Garibaldi's evaluation of Carlo. During Primo's investigation of Carlo and Amadia, he discovered that Carlo and Garibaldi had a closer relationship than he had imagined. Not only did Garibaldi publish several articles in the Italian Sun, his second son, Giardi, was also Carlo's palace guard. Being able to allow his son to get close to Carlo also means that in Garibaldi's heart, Carlo is at least not the kind of arrogant prince who cannot see the situation clearly. Combined with the previous influence of the Italian Sun on Spain, it can be basically concluded that Carlo had already anticipated the Spanish king selection and had been preparing in advance. Primo himself still wanted to cooperate with the wise king. If possible, it would not be impossible to establish a close relationship between King William I of Prussia and Prime Minister Bismarck. Decades ago, Prussia was also a country that was arbitrarily invaded and humiliated by France. But after decades of reforms, Prussia has become one of the most powerful countries in continental Europe, and the war with France is also the focus of Primo's attention. For Primo, what he hoped was to see Spain achieve revival and return to the throne of a first-class power and a great power in Europe. Primo is still very confident at this point. If he can welcome a monarch who supports his reforms, perhaps the revival of Spain is not a dream, but a reality that can be seen in 20 years. Carlo's emotions were mixed. Although Carlo had always been looking forward to winning this competition, he became nervous and hesitant when he suddenly learned that he was going to become the King of Spain. Seriously speaking, reviving Spain in 1869 was definitely the most difficult task among all the major European powers. Spain was in a slump at the beginning. Internally, the Republicans, Reformists, Conservatives, and Collis factions were creating trouble for each other, and the country was in constant chaos. Externally, Britain and France would not allow Spain to become too powerful. If Spain wanted to revive, Britain and France would be the first to bear the brunt. This is definitely a hellish start, as difficult as Poland's counterattack against Germany at the beginning of World War II. After adjusting his mentality a little, Carlo decided to go to Spain, and he was determined to go to Spain. Now that I have traveled to this world, how can I be worthy of this opportunity if I don't fight bravely? Moreover, Britain and France are not absolutely invincible, and the Spanish mainland is at least still very safe. Neither Britain nor France would allow the other to occupy Spanish territory. At most, they could only block the expansion of the Spanish navy and colonies. Anyway, it is not only Spain that needs colonies now, and it will definitely not be Spain that takes the lead in opposing Britain and France the first 5 or even 10 years of Carlo's administration in Spain. The most important thing was to resolve Spain's internal conflicts and implement reforms to improve Spain's overall national strength. After the competition, Carlo met with his brother Emanuele. Putting aside this rivalry, Carlo and Emanuele still had a decent relationship. Although not as close as Carlo and the deceased Prince Oddone, they were not superficial brothers either. Emanuele congratulated Carlo on becoming the King of Spain. Although a smile on his face, there was a hint of regret on his face. He did not feel too much resentment. Carlo certainly would not take the initiative to make enemies with his brother. In the important stage of Spain's reform, Italy will be an important ally of Spain. Whether his old father was in power or Crown Prince Umberto would inherit the throne in the future, Carlo wanted to have good relations with Italy. After all, Italy is also a retreat. If Spain is really hopeless, the worst that can happen is that he can escape back to Italy and become a free and easy duke like Emanuele in history. Also coming to congratulate Carlo was Carlo's elder brother, Crown Prince Umberto. Crown Prince Umberto is the heir to the Italian throne, so he did not participate in this competition. Because he was determined to be the crown prince at birth, Crown Prince Umberto was friendly to his brothers. In his father's office, Carlo met the old king, who was a little reluctant to leave. "My son, I never thought you could win the competition with Emanuele. But no matter what, I still want to congratulate you on becoming the King of Spain." Vittorio Emanuele II looked at Carlo with a complicated expression, with a hint of surprise and some reluctance on his face. "Have you met Primo? When do you plan to go to Spain?" After expressing his blessings to Carlo, Vittorio Emanuele II asked 2 questions in succession. "Not yet, father. If possible, I want to go to Spain earlier and learn everything about Spain earlier." Carlo shook his head and replied, "First update, please support. The previous calculation error of the time between Rome and Madrid has been corrected." Chapter 19, Preparation before departure. As if he had known what Carlo would say, Vittorio Emanuele II sighed, but still nodded helplessly and said, "Okay, son, I can only wish you all the best. May God bless you, my child." "Father, I'm going to Spain. Don't you have any money for me?" Carlo suddenly said, as if asking for money. "Haha, of course, son." Carlo's interruption successfully made Vittorio Emanuele II less sad, and the old king also smiled and said, "But I have to remind you that the king's funds cannot be with the government's finances. No matter how much the government needs money, you can only provide funds to the government in the form of loans. Do you understand? This is actually a bloody lesson. If it is an absolute monarchy, it is not so bad. The king who holds great power can withdraw funds from the treasury at will, and the only one who suffers is the government. But Spain is a constitutional monarchy. If the king's slush fund and the government's treasury are not distinguished, the only one who will suffer will be the king. It is also easy for others to exploit them, and to be blamed for misappropriating government funds, thus causing hatred among the Spaniards. This is why Vittorio Emanuele II reminded Carlo that the king's treasury and the government's treasury must be clearly distinguished. Even if it is a loan, the specific interest and repayment period must be written out. Carlo nodded. He understood all this. Many of Carlo's plans require a lot of money, and his own small treasury could not be mixed with the government's treasury. After a brief silence, Vittorio Emanuele II looked at his youngest son and said, "Although Italy's finances are not rich, the House of Savoy still has some capital. I will give you 30 million lire, plus some servants to take care of your daily life. My child, if you think that being the King of Spain is not the life you want, you are always welcome in Italy." Carlo was quite surprised at the support of Vittorio Emanuele II. 30 million lire was equivalent to 1.2 million pounds. Although it seemed a small number, it was enough to build a main battleship level dreadnought in the era of dreadnoughts. Even in the United Kingdom, which has the strongest comprehensive national strength, a skilled worker only earns 9 shillings and 6 pence per week, and this is the income of adult male workers. If it is a woman or a child, it will be even lower. £1 equals 20 shillings, 1 shilling equals 12 pence, £1.2 million is equivalent to the income of more than 50,000 British workers who work hard for a year, which is enough to prove the huge amount of money. Even the Italian royal family only has an annual income of £300,000 to £400,000 after all expenses, and no more than £500,000 at most. This also meant that Vittorio Emanuele II gave almost all of the royal family's 3-year income to Carlo, allowing Carlo to have sufficient funds in Spain to carry out his plans. Although Carlo had never experienced the father-son relationship with Vittorio Emanuele II since childhood, he was still moved by the sincerity of his father Vittorio Emanuele II. This also made Carlo determined not to let the Italian royal family and Mussolini disappear together. No matter whether it was Vittorio Emanuele II or Crown Prince Umberto, as long as the Savoy dynasty controlled Italy, Carlo's Spain would never take the initiative to become an enemy of Italy. A few days later, Carlo saw Primo again. Although there was less than 10 days between the two meetings, the conversation between the two became more intimate and friendly. Primo looked at the king candidate he had personally chosen and expressed his respect and support. "Dear Prince Carlo, on behalf of the Prime Minister of Spain, I invite you to inherit the throne of Spain and become the king of all Spaniards. It is my honor, Marquis Primo." Carlo nodded with a smile, and he was not at all embarrassed about the throne that he had won legally. "I look forward to working with you, Marquis Primo." Carlo continued, "As I said before, I will unconditionally support your reforms and will not be a problem in your reforms." Hearing Carlo express his support for the reform directly, Primo finally felt relieved and happy. "It is my honor to serve you, your highness." Primo gave Carlo a standard Spanish noble salute and said seriously. Primo did not mind serving the monarch he recognized. Although Primo's loyalty was dedicated to the whole of Spain, as long as Carlo was on the throne of Spain, and as long as Carlo did not show his incompetent side, Primo would be loyal to Carlo. "Since the throne has been confirmed, I will return to Spain in the next few days. Your Highness, I hope you can come to Madrid within a month, and we will prepare a grand coronation ceremony for you." Primo also smiled and said to Carlo, "No, Marquis Primo." Carlo shook his head and rejected Primo's proposal. Franco-Prussian War. Carlo was still worried about any unexpected events. If Primo was assassinated after returning to Spain, Carlo would still face the same situation as Amadeo, with no one available when he went to Madrid. Although the subordinates selected by Carlo for himself, including Garibaldi's second son, Giardi, all possessed good abilities, it was impossible for these people to hold high positions from the beginning. There are only two people that Carlo can rely on in Spain, namely Primo and Serrano, who hold power in the Spanish government and army. The most important of them is Primo. Primo is not only an important figure in the reform faction, but his ability is also greater than that of Serrano. In Carlo's plan, Primo would remain as Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Spain until his health failed or Spain's reforms were completed. Compared to Primo, Serrano is actually more suitable to be the mainstay of the army. As an officer, Serrano has enough prestige in the army, so it is the best choice to let him lead the Spanish army. In the first few years of Carlo's administration, power was still controlled by Primo and Serrano. This period was also the time when Carlo's several prime ministers slowly gained experience and cultivated their reputations. Only after he is sure that one of them can take over the positions of Primo and Serrano will Carlo consider retiring the two mainstays, Primo and Serrano. Second update, please support. Chapter 20 Arrival in Madrid. August 17, 1869. Carlo boarded a ship to Spain with his three confidants, Giardi, Carmen Esposito, and Drew Rosso, as well as dozens of servants, cooks, tailors, and doctors personally selected by his father Vittorio Emanuele II, and a palace guard of about 500 people. Carlo was very satisfied with the palace guards that his father had entrusted to him. At Carlo's strong request, most of the soldiers in this palace guard had participated in the Italian Unification War, and many of them came from Garibaldi's army. The combat effectiveness of these soldiers is worth guaranteeing, and with the command of Garibaldi's second son, Giardi, there is no need to worry about their loyalty. In addition, the families of these soldiers would also accompany Carlo to Spain, which was another means of ensuring their loyalty. In short, from now on, these soldiers will be controlled by Carlo, and Carlo will also need to provide them with military funds and weapons and equipment in exchange for their absolute loyalty. With these 500 people as a foundation, it would be much easier for Carlo to expand his guards in the future. After all, if you want to build an army, in addition to carefully selecting the commander at the head, you also need some low-level officers who have truly experienced war, to speed up the construction of the army and shape the soul of an elite army. On the largest ship in the fleet, Carmen Esposito and Andrea Rosso were looking at the vast Mediterranean with excitement, feeling extremely excited. When they learned that Carlo was an Italian prince, they were very excited. They originally thought that Carlo was just a nobleman, but they didn't expect that Carlo's status was higher than they imagined. And a few days ago, when they learned from Carlo that he was about to go to Spain to be crowned king, their shock was unparalleled. This also led to the fact that, when Carlo invited them to go to Spain, both of them excitedly expressed their agreement. After all, as civilians, they don't have many good promotion paths in Italy, and it is very difficult to get promoted. There are many outstanding graduates like them, but Italy does not have much space for them to exercise freely. But if he went to Spain, it would be completely different. Carlo didn't have many available men, they were his most trusted men, and naturally they would get enough training. Although he was only the deputy captain of Carlo's palace guard at the beginning, Carlo also promised that the palace guard would soon be expanded to the strength of a brigade. Both Carmen Esposito and Andrea Rosso could serve as the head of the expanded guards brigade. This was a much better prospect than if they stayed in Italy. After all, their lieutenant ranks could only serve as the commander of a company. At this time, both of them were completely devoted to Carlo and persuaded their families to follow them to Spain. The two guys, one fat and one thin, were not stupid. They knew what they had to do to express their loyalty in order to gain Carlo's favor. Carlo certainly saw their efforts. If these two guys were really capable, Carlo wouldn't mind letting them grow into independent figures in the Spanish army. If their abilities are mediocre, they will also become examples of Carlo spending a fortune to buy a horse and enter the Ministry of Defense or the General Staff and other departments to hold important positions. After several days of sailing, the fleet finally approached Barcelona in Catalonia. The port of Barcelona seemed to be crowded with people, and the crowd seemed to be welcoming Carlo's arrival. "Your Majesty, Regent Serrano is already waiting for you at the port." Seeing that Carlo was a little confused, Primo came up and said to Carlo with a smile. Hearing Primo's words, Carlo immediately understood that these people were prepared by Serrano in advance in order to make Carlo's arrival in Spain less embarrassing. If Carlo came to Spain and no one welcomed him, and even the people had no attitude towards it, then the only ones who would be embarrassed would be Carlo and the government that chose Carlo as king. Carlo agreed. The smile on his face did not change. "Where is Mr. Serrano?" Following Primo's guidance, Carlo and his party slowly walked to the port under the escort of the guards and headed to where the Spanish government was located. As soon as Carlo stepped into the port, the band that had been prepared at the port played the Spanish national anthem, Royal March. This song is very suitable for this purpose. It not only shows the importance of welcoming the new king, but also emphasizes the monarchy of Spain and gives Carlo enough face. "Your Highness." The Spanish government officials saluted Carlo one after another. Because Carlo had not yet sworn in the constitution and been crowned king of Spain, his identity was still the Duke of Italy. However, the oath can be taken at any time, which is different from the coronation ceremony, so everyone did not slack off on Carlo. Primo and Serrano smiled and introduced Carlo to the officials of the Spanish government. Carlo entered Barcelona welcomed by many officials. This is just a place to rest. After a short rest, Carlo will set off on the journey back to Madrid with the officials. The good news is that, although Spain does not have many kilometers of railways, it still has nearly 5,000 kilometers of railway mileage. As a big city on the east coast, Barcelona naturally has a railway connecting it to Madrid. But the bad news is that the railways of this era operated extremely slowly, and the riding experience was far inferior to that of later generations. For Carlo, the journey from Barcelona to Madrid might be even worse than those bumpy days on the Mediterranean. The good news is that once he returns to Madrid, Carlo will be able to live in the huge royal palace of Madrid. This is the third largest palace in Europe, second only to the Palace of Versailles and the Schönbrunn Palace. This also reflects the luxury of the Spanish Bourbon dynasty center of Spain again after many days. Although Carlo wanted to visit Madrid in 1869, after several days of travel, he no longer had the energy to think about anything else. The officers and soldiers who were traveling with him had the same idea. On the first day of arriving in Madrid, Carlo only took his confidants and servants to the royal palace of Madrid and slept comfortably in the clean king's bedroom that had been prepared long ago. First update, please support. Chapter 21 Cabinet Selection. In front of the watchful eyes of Spanish officials, Carlo held up the Spanish constitution and announced that he was crowned King of Spain, calling himself King Carlo I of Spain. Afterwards, Primo led government officials to swear allegiance to Carlo, and the framework of the Kingdom of Spain was formally established. According to the current Spanish constitution, the House of Representatives, the Senate and the royal government are three powers that coexist, representing legislative power, judicial power and executive power respectively. As King of Spain, Carlo nominally had the power to appoint and dismiss the Prime Minister and senior officials, open or dissolve Parliament, mobilize the army, enact or appeal laws, listen to state affairs, and convene cabinet meetings. But in reality, the only power Carlo can use at present is to listen to national affairs and convene cabinet meetings. These two things can be combined into one, that is, Carlo can understand the current situation in Spain and the development of various policies through cabinet meetings. That's all the cabinet government headed by Primo will listen. However, this situation is not absolute. The nominal King of Spain still has a lot of power. Once Carlo has cultivated enough reputation for himself and won the trust of the people and some officials, he can still influence the government through his power and achieve the policies or laws he wants to make. Before he had enough reputation and status, Carlo could be content to be a king without much power. At least the responsibility would not fall on his head. Carlo's coronation was scheduled for November, about 2.5 months later. The Spanish government will have enough time to prepare for the coronation ceremony, and foreign guests will have enough time to come to Spain. Of course, Spain is only a second-rate country in Europe after all, and the king's coronation ceremony may not necessarily attract the attention of the powerful countries, except for neighboring countries such as Italy and France. However, considering that Prussia and France are still at war, it is highly unlikely that these two countries will send representatives to attend. Later, in the meeting room of the Royal Palace arrangement of Madrid, Prime Minister Primo, is the list of the cabinet government ready? Carlo sat in the main seat and asked Primo, who came in exhausted. It's ready, Your Majesty. Primo nodded and handed over a list respectfully. Since Your Majesty has taken the oath of office under the Constitution, it is not appropriate for Mr. Serrano to continue to serve as regent. Your Majesty, do you have any arrangements for Mr. Serrano? Primo asked. The reason why Serrano became regent was entirely because the Spanish throne was unresolved at the time, which gave rise to the position of regent. Now that Carlo has come to Spain and been crowned, it would be disrespectful to Carlo to continue to be involved in politics. Historically, Serrano became Prime Minister of Spain after Amadia's coronation, but that was because Primo was assassinated. Now that Primo is still alive and well, the position of Prime Minister is naturally not suitable for Serrano. Considering that there was no position in the cabinet government that was more suitable for Serrano, except the Minister of Defense, the answer to this question had been known from the beginning. Let Duke Serrano be the Minister of Defense. Carlo said. He will also serve as the army commander-in-chief. I feel relieved to hand over the army to a general like Duke Serrano. Serrano's resume was quite impressive, and was also conferred the title of Duque de la Torre for his contribution in occupying the Dominican Republic. So many merits, big and small, are not something that an ordinary person can obtain. This also proves in some ways that Serrano himself possesses excellent military command capabilities. Carlo for his opinion. After all, Carlo has become the king of Spain, so he should be given enough attention at least in terms of face. Carlo also understood this, and was very pleased with Primo's superficial attention. This also meant that Primo himself was not opposed to the monarchy. Like Serrano, he opposed those monarchs who had no ability, but wanted to monopolize power. After signing the cabinet list of the Spanish government, Carlo turned his gaze back to Primo, and asked the question that concerned him most. Prime Minister Primo, when will the next cabinet meeting be held? According to the progress of holding a cabinet meeting once a week, the next meeting should be in 3 days, Your Majesty. Primo replied. Primo didn't care that Carlo wanted to attend the cabinet meeting. After all, it was Carlo's right. But if Carlo wanted to express his opinions in the cabinet meeting, as soon as he arrived in Spain, Primo would pretend not to hear it. After all, no matter how talented a person is, he must first understand the situation in Spain, right? If you express your opinions without understanding any of the situation, what use will these opinions be to Spain? I will attend the cabinet meeting in 3 days, Prime Minister Primo. Hearing that the cabinet meeting would be held in 3 days, Carlo said straight to the point. I hope to see detailed information about Spain during this period and understand what level our country is at. Please rest assured that I will not interfere in any of Spain's policies before I have sufficient understanding. Prime Minister Primo, you can start your reform preparations. I will support you unconditionally, and I will express my position at the meeting. Primo nodded. With Carlo's unconditional support for reform, he didn't care about Carlo's possible suggestions at the cabinet meeting. After all, suggestions are just suggestions. It depends on Primo himself whether he listens to them or not. Carlo's firm support for reform can actually help Primo, which is very helpful in improving the current situation in Spain. Ironically, Primo and Serrano, who overthrew Queen Isabel II of Spain, could actually be classified as royalists. Although Primo's loyalty to Spain is higher than that to the king, he is still loyal to the king as long as the king does not harm the interests of Spain. Even if it was just for the unification of Spain, Primo would not sideline the king, because only when Carlo's reputation and status became higher and higher would the various regions of Spain obey the king's rule and follow the government's management. If all regions are unwilling to obey the king's rule, Spain will become more and more chaotic, and various regions will seek autonomy or even independence, which will be fatal for Spain. This is also the reason why Primo supports the monarchy. The current loose republic cannot save Spain at all, but will push Spain into the abyss of division and regional autonomy. Only a unified and highly centralized royal government can help Spain get out of the abyss of divided autonomy and reshape a unified and powerful Spanish kingdom. Second update, please support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 4 Element of Reform. Carlo knew that Spain was quite backward at that time, but he did not expect that Spain's development in all aspects would lag so far behind. As of the beginning of this year, the estimated population of Spain was 16.6 million. Why is it such a round number? Because the Spanish government at that time was unable to conduct a detailed population census. This was just a rough estimate made by the Spanish government, based on the birth registration and death of the population in various places. Worse still, the illiteracy rate in Spain is as high as over 70%, which means that out of a population of 16.6 million, at least 11.6 million are illiterate. The poor level of education and the chaotic situation in recent years have resulted in Spain's per capita annual income being the lowest in Western Europe, at only 87 pesetas, or a little over £3. Although the lower classes in all European countries had a hard time during this era, exploitation by factory owners and oppression by capitalists were common occurrences. But an annual income of just over £3 is obviously an extremely unhealthy level. The per capita annual income in the UK is over £9, and other European countries also remain above £6 to £7. The average Spaniard can only earn half or even 1/3 of what citizens of other countries earn. This is why the people rebelled against Queen Isabella, because the Spaniards really can't survive. Looking at such data, Carlo couldn't help but feel a headache. Carlo originally thought that Italy's situation was already quite bad, but he didn't expect it to be nothing compared to Spain. Except for the illiteracy rate, where Italy and Spain are evenly matched, Italy is able to crush Spain in other aspects. Carlo now has only one idea, which is to quickly push forward Primo's reforms and improve the bad situation in Spain first. Now Spain cannot achieve revival, and it is even questionable whether the kingdom can continue to exist. Although Queen Isabel was driven away, she left Carlo with an extremely bad Spain. Faced with a Spain that is rotten to the core, it is no longer possible to save it by focusing on development. At the cabinet meeting a few days later, Carlo sat at the top seat, quietly waiting for Primo's proposal for reform. Primo was well prepared for this reform. The cabinet nominated by Primo was basically composed of reformists, and the only two who were not reformists, Serrano and Carlo, also expressed their support for the reform, a comprehensive reform plan for Spain. He handed the plan to Carlo and said to him solemnly and seriously, "Your Majesty, this is the Spanish reform plan that I and dozens of officials wrote after a long period of investigation and research. The following is the initial reform plan. Please take a look." The initial reform plan was actually very simple, with only 4 categories, namely agriculture, education, industry and military reform. Prime Minister Primo, please tell me about your reform plan in detail. Although he supported the reform in his heart, this did not prevent Carlo from wanting to hear Primo's perfect reform plan. Primo nodded, stood up and introduced to all the cabinet officials, "Our initial reforms only have 4 aspects, namely agriculture, industry, education and military reforms. In terms of agriculture, I plan to promote agricultural tax reduction to increase the income of the agricultural population. At the same time, we will promote the export of food so that the agricultural population can have sufficient sales. In terms of industry, I think we should restore Spain's industrial construction in a short period of time, invest in new factories, and build our own industrial zones. Building factories can provide more jobs, which will also help us further increase per capita income. In terms of education reform, I plan to build more literacy classes to reduce our illiterate population, but this requires huge financial investment, so it is the third option for reform. Finally, there is the military reform. I hope to expand our army to about 100,000 men and equip our army with more artillery. A sufficient number of artillery has proven its effectiveness on the battlefield. Whether it is to defend against foreign enemies or to stabilize the order in Spain, it is necessary to enhance the combat effectiveness of the army. After hearing Primo's reform plan, Carlo had no time to express any opinion before the army minister Serrano, who was sitting next to him, could not help but speak. Serrano stood up, looked at Primo in disbelief, and asked in surprise, "Prime Minister Primo, don't you know how many pesetas are left in the Spanish treasury? Each of your reforms will require tens of millions of pesetas, and our government simply does not have the money. With all due respect, if we cannot prepare enough pesetas before the reform is implemented, this reform is doomed to fail. Don't we still have a lot of land?" Primo looked at Serrano, who raised the rebuttal with a flat smile on his face. For a monarchy, the largest landowner in the country is definitely the monarch himself. Queen Isabel herself was a licentious and greedy monarch, so it is not surprising that the Bourbon dynasty owned the most arable land in Spain. After driving out Queen Isabella, all the farmland originally belonging to the Bourbon dynasty was confiscated by the Spanish provisional government. These lands were the basis for Primo to implement reforms. Although these lands once belonged to the king, they certainly would not pass to Carlo along with the throne. Carlo naturally understood this, and he had no intention of becoming a local landlord, let alone ruining his reputation for a little land. On the contrary, if Carlo supports using these lands to exchange for sufficient funds for the government, this can become one of the topics to promote Carlo. Seeing that Carlo had no intention of taking advantage of the land, Primo finally breathed a sigh of relief and explained to Carlo and Serrano, the Bourbon family owns a vast amount of land, which is enough to provide sufficient funds for our reforms. I plan to divide these lands into 3 parts, one of which will be distributed free of charge to Spanish farmers, so that they will have enough arable land to grow food. The other part will be sold to capitalists and farmers, to accumulate enough funds for our reforms. The remaining part will be nationalized, and can be rented out to farmers at a low price for cultivation. I support your idea, Prime Minister Primo. Carlo nodded and had no objection to the proposal to divide the land into 3 parts, and I have another suggestion, to raise funds for reform. Why don't we try issuing government bonds? First update, please support Chapter 23 Farm Tax Relief Act. Your Majesty, with all due respect, our people no longer have the funds to buy our national debt. Hearing Carlo's proposal, Primo smiled bitterly and reminded Carlo, "Hi. Perhaps 10 million pesetas will be enough to meet our initial educational needs. 100% of this batch of national debt will be used for education reform, which will not only reduce the number of illiterate people in our country, but will also be beneficial to factories that require some knowledge reserves. Once our first batch of bonds is repaid on time, it will be much easier to issue such bonds in the future. At least for us now, this is a more reliable means than borrowing, and it can also allow the government to bear less interest. Capitalists are all profit seeking. The interest rate on government bonds is higher than that on banks, so it will definitely attract some capitalists to buy government bonds. If specific special government bonds are issued specifically for reforms such as education, this will also reassure the capitalists who buy the government bonds. After all, one thing that capitalists are worried about is what the government will do with the money. Investing in industries like education is definitely better than squandering by the government and the nobles. At least capitalists don't have to worry about the government not having to worry about the government enough money to repay the national debt in the future. You can try. After thinking for a long time, Primo finally nodded and decided to give it a try. The first batch of government bonds does not need to be issued in large quantities and can be used to test whether this method can raise funds for the government. It would be great if we could raise funds, but even if we can't, the government won't suffer much loss. After discussion in the cabinet, it was finally decided unanimously to set the issuance amount of the first batch of education bonds at 8 million pesetas, or £307,000. Although this amount of money is not much, it can be used to build a number of literacy classes dedicated to eliminating illiteracy. The literacy classes do not even need a complete school institution, just find a house to put some tables and benches, get some books to teach the Spaniards simple elementary school knowledge. As soon as the news that the government was going to issue education bonds came out, it immediately caused a sensation in Spain. Many Spaniards are still willing to see the government's efforts in education, which at least proves that the current royal government pays more attention to civilians than during the Isabel period. Even farmers are willing to see the country's investment in education. Even if they cannot enjoy the benefits brought by education reform, it does not mean that their children cannot enjoy them. However, despite support, few people are willing to buy education bonds. Although the first batch of government bonds issued was only 8 million pesetas, only 200,000 were sold within 2 days of issuance, less than £10,000. Carlo realized that this was a good opportunity and would not miss it. On the 3rd day of the bond issuance, Carlo publicly announced that he would subscribe to 3 million pesetas of education bonds. 3 million pesetas of bonds were not much, only a few £100,000, less than half of the bond issuance. But Carlo's active subscription to national debt as king had a different meaning for the Spaniards. Although it is impossible to support Carlo because of such a small matter, many Spaniards have a better impression of Carlo and are willing to give Carlo enough time to show his side as an excellent monarch. At least Carlo has shown a side that is far different from Queen Isabel, and the Spanish have also gained patience with Carlo. After Carlo took the lead, the capitalists finally became more active. It took almost another week to sell most of the 8 million pesetas of national debt, and the government had the initial funds to promote educational reform. In mid-September 1869, many literacy classes sprang up in Madrid, and they adopted a voluntary registration and free learning method. As long as you are a Spanish citizen, you can enroll in literacy classes. Books and tuition are free, but you must attend literacy classes at least once a week. Literacy classes still took into account the actual situation of a large number of ordinary people 12 hours, and can even be as high as 13 or 14 hours. Not to mention, having 2 days off a week, it is not easy to take a leave when you are sick, because capitalists do not want the factory output to be reduced due to employees' leave, which ultimately affects the speed at which they make money. As for work-related injuries, they have nothing to do with this era. Not to mention, being injured at work, even if you die at work, there will not be any compensation. The various welfare policies of later generations were all fought for by workers and laborers all over the world in the long process of oppression and resistance. The literacy campaign and the educational reform is being carried out vigorously and has a great impact on Spain. After all, it is a free literacy campaign, and the Spanish are very willing to participate in the literacy classes. And Carlo also has his own little idea in the literacy classes, that is, the literacy classes in Spain will only use Spanish and will not use Catalan and other various regional languages. The purpose of doing so is also to reduce the sense of division between the various regions of Spain and Spain. Assimilating the nation should start with language. It is very important to speak Spanish in Spain. The good news is that today Spain has been integrated for hundreds of years, and most people are not opposed to an integrated Spain. At present, the independence and nationalist factions in various regions are still a small minority, which will not have much impact on the unification of Spain. While the literacy campaign was underway, Primo also launched reforms in agriculture. Although the Spanish government's fiscal revenue was not high, this did not stop Primo from reducing agricultural taxes. On September 27, 1869, when the literacy campaign was still being talked about by the Spaniards, the Spanish cabinet government had submitted a brand new agricultural tax reduction bill at a new session of the House of Representatives. This bill caused a greater sensation in Spain than the literacy campaign, because the vast majority of Spain's population is agricultural and tax cuts are of real benefit to them. As expected, the House of Representatives voted unanimously to pass the bill with over 70% of the vote, and the cabinet government also announced that tax cuts would begin in 1870 to actually increase the income of the agricultural population. Second update, please support Chapter 24 Counterinsurgency in Cuba. As soon as the two decrees of free literacy education and agricultural tax reduction policy were promulgated, the Spaniards were surprised to find that the king above their heads did not seem so annoying anymore. At least during the reign of Queen Isabella, the government would not proactively propose tax cuts on agriculture, let alone establish any free literacy education. But for Carlo at this time, only one trouble had been solved. As early as the Spanish Revolution, the Cuban colony took the opportunity to launch an independence war. Occupying many cities convened the so-called Constitutional Convention and elected a president. This was unacceptable to Spain, because Cuba was the most valuable of all Spanish colonies, and one of the few colonies that could generate positive income. If the Cuban colony was lost, not only would the Spanish government suffer a significant loss in annual fiscal revenue, but it would also be a blow to the reputation of the new King Carlo and the new cabinet. The current Spanish royal government is gradually getting on the right track, and it is time to deal with the restless Cuban colony and create more income for the Spanish government. There were not many Cuban rebels at that time, and they did not have any advanced weapons and equipment. For the Spanish government, apart from the need to fight a long distance across the Atlantic, there were no major problems to overcome. Thus, the first large-scale war since Carlo became king was officially launched. Army Minister Serrano led 5,500 soldiers to Cuba to quell the rebellion and strived to eliminate as many Cuban rebels as possible. This counterinsurgency war, which is not actually very large in scale, is also an opportunity for Carlo. Carmen Esposito and Andrea Rosso will also join this counterinsurgency war as low-level officers. Carlo's expectation for them is that they can achieve certain merits in suppressing the rebellion, which will also facilitate Carlo's subsequent promotion and appointment of them. Carlo left the more capable Giotti in Madrid to lead the 500-man palace guard. There was no other way. Carlo's safety was more important, and he had to have a trustworthy subordinate to be responsible for the safety of the palace. Carlo still trusted Serrano's military ability, More importantly, Serrano had served as the governor of Cuba from 1859 to 1862 and had a good understanding of the situation in Cuba. Letting him go to Cuba to quell the rebellion is the most appropriate option, and it is also the option that has the greatest hope of resolving the Cuban issue in a short period of time and preventing a rebellion from occurring in Cuba in the short term. As for the long-term future, it was not within Carlo's consideration. Because for Carlo, Spain's colonies scattered around the world were a burden to Spain. Cuba is across the Atlantic Ocean from Spain, but only across the Florida Strait from the United States. Having won the Civil War, the United States already has the potential to become a world hegemon, and its comprehensive national strength is constantly improving. For Spain, the most valuable colony was located at the mouth of the Americans, which meant that Spain was destined to be unable to defend Cuba. Instead of doing this, it would be better to give up Cuba at an appropriate time in exchange for other colonies that are not so valuable, but can be firmly controlled. The same is true for the Philippines. In Carlo's future plan for Spain, both Cuba and the Philippines need to be abandoned, as the Spanish colonial bases in Africa. However, precisely because Cuba is one of the few colonies that can bring positive returns to Spain, it is difficult to get the public to agree to lose Cuba. At least until Carlo had enough prestige to bear such a loss, or before waiting for a good opportunity, Spain would not carry out colonial exchange. On September 22, 1869, Carlo saw off Serrano on the Cuban expedition in Madrid and personally promised all Spanish soldiers that he would hold a celebration banquet for them when they returned to Madrid and grant land and titles to those who made great contributions. The awarding of titles for military merit is still very attractive to soldiers, and it is also one of the most effective opportunities for the lower class people to climb up. Including Serrano himself and Primo, they are among the representative figures who were awarded knighthood for military merit. Although Spanish soldiers did not have great ambitions to become dukes and marquesas, it was no problem to strive for some land and financial rewards as much as possible. Carlo, who had just returned to the palace after seeing off Serrano, soon received a report from the guards that Prime Minister Primo wanted to see him. Since Carlo fulfilled his promise and firmly supported the reform, Primo's attitude towards Carlo became very respectful, and he was willing to cultivate a commendable monarch-subject relationship with Carlo. This is also good news for Carlo. Just like now, Primo will consult Carlo's opinion many times, and is willing to leave some things to Carlo to decide. Although Primo was not like Garibaldi, who had no ambition for power and status, he was not an autocratic person either. Carlo was also happy with this kind of partnership. Following Primo, he will build up some reputation for reform, and then slowly cultivate his own confidence in the government and the army, and be ready to take over the country after Primo. This was also Carlo's plan. Your Majesty, this is a plan for industrial construction. Please approve it. As soon as he met Carlo, Primo handed over a long-prepared industrial plan and said straight to the point. Are we going to start industrial construction now? Prime Minister Primo, if I remember correctly, it seems that our government does not have so much money to build industry. Carlo was a little surprised at the speed of Primo's reform. The reforms in education and agriculture have only been going on for less than a month, so why do we have to start industrial construction immediately? For Spain, which is currently in urgent need of funds, launching so many projects at once is not a good thing. Carlo can understand Primo's eagerness for success, but if the pursuit of speed alone puts the Spanish government in a bankruptcy crisis, it will be a loss. The first batch of industrial construction is expected to cost 55 million pesetas. I plan to issue industrial bonds of about 25 million pesetas in batches, and the remaining 30 million pesetas can be obtained by borrowing from foreign capital. As long as we can promote industrial construction, our economic situation will improve in the next few years, and Spain's bad situation can be improved overall. Primo explained. Queen Isabella's government only cared about its own enjoyment and ignored national development, which caused Spain's construction in all aspects to stagnate for a long time and even regressed. The only good news is that the previous government, which ignored development, did not borrow heavily from abroad. The current Spanish government can still obtain some startup funds for projects through borrowing. First update, please support Chapter 25 Italian Workers. After hearing Primo's explanation of the financial preparations for industrial construction, Carlo nodded and asked, when will the industrial construction be started? What are our initial construction goals? I plan to build a small industrial base in Seville, Andalusia, and increase our steel production. After increasing steel production, we will invest in railway construction, and we expect to increase the railway mileage to more than 6,000 kilometers in the next 5 years, connecting the east, west, south, and north regions of Spain. Primo replied. Even though it is just railway construction, it has a huge impact on the industry. The steel rails needed for the railways require steel mills to work overtime to increase steel production, which can drive the development of a series of ancillary industries. Spain has considerable reserves of coal and iron ore resources in Andalusia, which is convenient for industrial development. Although most of the coal in Spain's coal mines is of relatively poor quality, there is still no problem in carrying out initial industrial production. After all, the total steel production of various countries in this era was not large, and did not reach the exaggerated level of tens of millions of tons in later generations. The most powerful industrial country at present is the British Empire, but the British steel production is only about 300,000 tons, which is not yet such an exaggerated scale. However, Spain's steel production is even lower. Because of the abandonment of industrial construction during the reign of Queen Isabel, Spain's annual steel production is only at the 1,000-ton level, or a pitiful 2,000 tons. Although part of the reason is that Spain does not have excellent iron ore and coal reserves, as a second-rate European country with a population of more than 16 million, such industrial level is still too shabby. When our steel mills are put into production in large quantities, we hope to increase steel production to more than 10,000 tons in the next 5 years. At least our steel production should meet the needs of domestic industrial construction. Spain is incomplete without industry. Primo said. Building 1,000 kilometers of railway in 5 years may seem slow, but it is not easy for Spain, whose steel production is quite poor. In the nearly 30 years from 1840 to 1869, Spain only built 5,000 kilometers of railways. This construction speed was far behind that of countries such as Britain, France, Germany and the United States. Spain is mountainous, and building railways is very necessary to better strengthen the connection between regions. This will not only strengthen the kingdom's control over the various regions, but also speed up population mobility and economic connectivity between regions. I have your plan, Prime Minister Primo. After hearing Primo's complete explanation, Carlo nodded and approved Prime Minister Primo's plan without any hesitation. Obviously, this industrial plan is very necessary for Spain. Although the investment is not that large, it is a good start for Spain's industrial development, is it? Carlo asked curiously. Whether it is building an industrial base or laying railways, we need a large number of workers. But your majesty, you also know that the black workers we bought from Africa are not very peaceful, and they are also a destabilizing factor for Spain. Compared to these lowly black laborers, I think it is a more appropriate choice to introduce foreign white laborers. When I went to Italy before, I found that a large number of agricultural population in Italy chose to immigrate overseas. If possible, can we contact the Italian government to introduce some Italian immigrants and workers? Doing so will not only solve our labor shortage problem, but also speed up our industrial construction. I think it is necessary to give it a try. Primo said. If you want to build an industrial base and lay railways, you must prepare a large number of workers as a labor force. This is difficult for Spain to do. Although Spain has a large agricultural population, these agricultural populations are scattered across the vast Spanish territory and own their own land. It is impossible for them to cross half of Spain for a small income from labor. But these Italian farmers are different. They can hardly survive in Italy, which is why they choose to emigrate overseas. In this case, why not find an opportunity to attract some Italian immigrants to Spain, and at the same time, make up for the shortage of Spanish workers? You have to know that most of Italy's agricultural population is located in southern Italy, which was ruled by the autocratic kingdom of the Two Sicilies not long ago. These peasants had experienced a long period of absolute monarchy, and were much easier to rule than the black laborers and republicans. This is also one of the reasons why Primo has set his sights on Italian workers. Workers who are down to earth, capable of working, and not causing trouble will be welcomed everywhere. Carlo was a little surprised to hear Primo say this, because introducing Italian workers was originally part of Carlo's plan. This was also beneficial to Carlo's rule. After all, Carlo was born into the Italian royal family. These Italians who came to Spain would certainly not oppose Carlo's rule, and compared with the native Spaniards, the Italians would be closer to Carlo. Carlo certainly would not object to such a request. That was completely beneficial to him. For the development of Spain, I'm willing to do this, Carlo said with a smile. If the government is ready, then our industrial construction can start immediately. I will take care of the labor issue, and I hope our industrial construction will go as smoothly as expected. Primo nodded and said respectfully, as you command, Your Majesty. After all, Carlo still has too few people. Now the only ones available are Giotti and Lauren. Giotti needs to take charge of the palace guards, and Lauren is the only one who can go to Italy to discuss labor issues. Fortunately, this was not a big deal, and Italy was not short of thousands of workers. In addition, Carlo and Vittorio Emanuele II had a good father-son relationship, so it was not a problem to sign an agreement with Italy to introduce workers. Sure enough, Lauren's entire journey took only more than 10 days, and he brought back a labor introduction agreement for Carlo. Carlo's requirements were not high. In the past few years, introducing thousands or tens of thousands of workers from Italy every year was enough to meet Spain's development needs. Once Spain's construction has achieved certain results and people's living standards and incomes continue to rise, it will naturally attract some European people who can no longer survive in their hometowns to immigrate to Spain. Second update, please support. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.